Please leave a comment where in the world you are listening from. I was moving from Florida to DC and was going to load up my car as much as I could with stuff. However, I lived on the third floor plus a bit of a walk from my assigned parking spot, so I figured I could use some help. I posted an ad on Craigslist gigs. I said I was looking for someone to help me load some heavy items like TV, desk, etc. in my car. Less than an hour's worth of work, and I'd pay $45 or whatever. I give the very first responder my number and address, and he shows up. He was probably 5 feet 8 inches and 350 pounds of pure fat. The sweat and smell coming off of this guy in the Florida heat was pretty nauseating, but I didn't care as long as he did the job right. While he was carting heavy stuff, I was loading lighter things. Whenever I'd go upstairs to grab another load, he'd hurry after me so he could walk up the stairs behind me. I had the door propped open, so he didn't have to worry about me needing to unlock the door for him or anything. When he'd follow me up the stairs, he made these weird grunting noises like mmhm, but I assumed it was because he was out of shape. Eventually, everything's loaded properly, save for some sweat smears on my stuff. I pay him, and he drives off. I go back in my place to finish loading and cleaning. I go out maybe 45 minutes later to put another load in my car, and I see his truck is back, parked across the street from mine. He's sitting in the driver's seat, looking at me. When he sees me notice him, he looks away. I walk over to his window and knock. He rolls it down, and I ask if he needs any help or if he was lost. I was really confused as to why he had come back, and I knew he didn't live near me. He didn't say anything, just rolled his window back up and drove off. I'm okay, whatever. Of course, 5 minutes later, my phone starts blowing up. I don't recognize the number, so I don't answer the calls. Then texts start rolling in. Him, I bet you taste salty and sweet. Me, who is this? Him, your puss. Him, what you up to tonight? I can come back over. I get this sinking feeling it's the Craigslist guy. He had never called me about the job when I gave him my number, so I didn't know what his number was. Him, I like your pink underwear. Then I realize he was looking up my dress when I was walking up the stairs. I immediately feel like a total idiot for wearing a dress that day. He then started dialing my number over and over again. I didn't know how to do the block number thing through Sprint, so I had to just turn my phone off. Later, I was with my guy friend grabbing a bite and turned my phone back on. I got another text from the guy about how he wanted to toss me around like a rag doll and tie me up and make me beg for it. I show the text to my friend and tell him the story. The Craigslist creep then proceeds to start blowing up my phone again. So my friend answers and says he is going to cut his dick off and feed it to his dog if he ever contacts me again. I moved the next day, so I never had to worry about him randomly showing up in his truck again. Since then, I've bought and sold stuff on Craigslist, but I always make people meet me at a public place. I also stalk people's email addresses, Google Plus accounts, etc. I was 18 at the time, and like most 18-year-olds, I was feeling equal parts adventurous and stupid. I decided to post on Craigslist looking for a pet and master relationship. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I was young, curious, and had just discovered this whole underground world of kink. It felt exciting, taboo, and completely different from the vanilla high school relationships I'd experienced so far. Of course, I didn't think things through past the initial thrill, but that's hindsight for you. The responses poured in almost immediately. Most of them were the predictable "Hey cutie" or "You up" messages you'd expect from a platform like Craigslist. Some were straight up creepy, guys who clearly thought pet meant something a lot weirder than what I was looking for. Others just felt off, like dudes who couldn't spell a full sentence or sent blurry bathroom selfies as their profile pics. I also got flagged more times than I could count, which should have been a sign to stop, but 18-year-old me didn't believe in signs. Eventually, I ran into someone who seemed promising? That's probably too strong a word. Let's just say he didn't immediately make me want to block him. He was polite, articulate, and actually seemed to understand what I was looking for. He asked a lot of questions, normal ones at first, like what I was into and what kind of dynamic I wanted. Then things got a little more specific. He wanted proof that I was real and not some bored catfish screwing with him. So he had me send pictures of myself doing random things, holding up 3 fingers, placing my hand on my forehead, stuff like that. In retrospect, it felt a bit like auditioning for a weird, low-budget role I didn't understand yet. But at the time, it made sense, so I went along with it. After chatting for a bit, we decided to meet at a hotel later that night. The plan was that I'd bring the toys, since apparently that responsibility fell on me, and wear my slave outfit under my dress. Looking back, I think I was more excited about putting the outfit together than actually meeting him. It felt like playing a character, stepping into some sultry, forbidden role. I packed my silk ties, mostly because they seemed safer than actual restraints in case things went south, and headed out. Meeting him in person was surprisingly normal at first. He wasn't creepy, which honestly felt like a win right away. He was polite, well-spoken, and older, definitely older. Not sugar daddy old, but definitely past the point where he should have been hanging out in Craigslist personals. I told myself it didn't matter. I was an adult, he was an adult, and this was what I wanted, or thought I wanted. Things got weird pretty quickly, though. After the small talk, he told me he was really into women with bush. Like really into it. I guess I hadn't done my homework, because I'd shaved beforehand, assuming that's what most guys preferred. The second he saw, his whole demeanor shifted. He wasn't mean about it, but there was this undeniable look of disappointment, like I'd shown up to a job interview without pants. He even made a few sad comments about it, like he was mourning the loss of something sacred. Still, we moved forward with the plan. He said I had to shower with him first and wash him. I tried to roll with it, treating it like part of the role play, but it was hard to ignore how awkward it felt. It wasn't sexy or intimate. It was mechanical, like bathing a stranger in a hospital or something. The whole time, he kept looking down at me like I'd let him down in some profound way. It was unsettling, but I kept going because at that point, I was already too far in to back out. After the shower, we moved to the bed. I brought out my silk ties, mostly because I didn't trust him enough to let him tie me up with anything more serious. He seemed fine with it, tied me up, and we had sex. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. It was just fine, like eating plain oatmeal when you were expecting pancakes. Once we were done, he said he wanted me to stay the night, but he had somewhere to be. He got dressed, gave me a polite goodbye, and left me sitting in a strange hotel room feeling equal parts used and relieved. I stayed there for a while, partly because I didn't want to seem too eager to leave and partly because I needed a minute to process what had just happened. When I finally left, I texted him later to let him know I didn't think this was going to work out. I told him he was too old for me, which was probably the nicest excuse I could come up with. He took it surprisingly well, which honestly made me feel worse. He didn't beg or guilt-trip me, just said he understood and wished me luck. The problem was he had a video of me. That part still haunts me. I don't know why I let him film in the first place. Probably some combination of naivety and wanting to seem cool and experienced. But after we parted ways, I started panicking about what he might do with it. I still Google my name from time to time, terrified that it's going to show up somewhere. So far, nothing's come up, but the anxiety never really goes away. Looking back, I can't even say it was a horrible experience. Weird, definitely. Awkward, for sure. But not traumatic or scarring. Just one of those things you do when you're young and dumb and trying to figure yourself out. He wasn't a bad guy, just not the kind of master I was looking for. Too gentle, too polite, too disappointed about my lack of pubic hair. If anything, the experience taught me a lot about what I actually wanted and, more importantly, what I didn't want. I learned that just because someone seems nice online doesn't mean they're a good fit in real life. I also learned that I'm not as into power dynamics as I thought I was, or at least not in the way Craigslist strangers advertise them. So yeah, that's the story of my brief foray into Craigslist kink. It's not something I'd recommend to others, but I also don't regret it. Sometimes you have to go through the weird stuff to figure out who you are. And sometimes you just end up scrubbing a stranger in a hotel shower while they mourn your lack of pubic hair. Either way, it's a hell of a story to tell later. This was back in February of this year. I was down in Texas for work. I live in North Dakota. For whatever reason, I got this idea in my head, completely out of nowhere. I had never even used Craigslist before, but I thought, why not give it a shot? Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was the unfamiliarity of being away from home, but I decided to hop on and check out the infamous casual encounters section. Scrolling through the ads was like diving into the bizarre corners of the internet I'd only heard about. Most of the posts were unappealing or downright terrifying. People with odd requests, photos that shouldn't exist, and grammar that made me lose faith in humanity. But then one caught my eye. The ad was simple and straightforward. The girl was looking for a friend with benefits who was tall, skinny, and into nerdy shit. Now, I'm not one to toot my own horn, but that sounded a lot like me. Tall? Check. Skinny? Check. Into nerdy shit. I could probably write essays on that. Figuring I'd see where this went, I responded to her ad with a quick message and a picture of myself. She replied surprisingly fast, with a face pic of her own. I won't lie, her photo wasn't bad. She had a nice smile, soft features, and seemed approachable. We exchanged a few more messages before transitioning to an actual phone call. The conversation flowed easily, like we'd known each other for years, not strangers connecting on Craigslist. After about an hour of chatting, she gave me her address and invited me over. At this point, I'm still thinking, what's the worst that could happen? I stopped at a nearby gas station to pick up some condoms, because hey, better safe than sorry, right? As I pulled up to her place, a small voice in the back of my head whispered that maybe I was getting in over my head, but I ignored it. When she opened the door, I was hit with an immediate wave of realization. This was not the girl from the picture she had sent me. Not even close. She was severely overweight, a solid 3 times the size of what I'd imagined based on her photo. My brain was still trying to process this massive bait and switch when, before I could say a word, she launched herself at me. I mean, full-on shoved her face into mine and started making out. Not a single word exchanged between us. In that moment, my brain sort of shut down. I wasn't operating on logic or reason anymore. I think my body just went into autopilot, letting my instincts or hormones take the wheel. I told myself, you're here now. Might as well see where this goes. Now, let me set the scene for you. This wasn't the fun, steamy encounter you might see in a movie or read about in one of those trashy romance novels. No, this was chaos. She was sloppy, ridiculously sloppy. Her tongue was all over my face like she was trying to lick peanut butter off my cheeks. I tried to go with it, thinking maybe things would improve once we got to the main event. Spoiler alert, they did not. When we moved to the bedroom, things took a turn I was not prepared for. She climbed on top of me, and I did my best to keep the situation under control. But then, the moment happened, the one that seared into my memory forever. She turned around while on top of me, giving me a full view of what can only be described as the hairiest butthole I have ever seen in my life. I'm not talking about a little stubble or a few stray hairs. I'm talking full-on 1970s porn star hairy. It was like she had a small forest growing back there. I stared in disbelief, my brain struggling to comprehend the sight in front of me. The front, while not hairless, was at least somewhat tamed. But this was something else entirely. It felt like a fever dream, like I had stepped into a bizarre alternate dimension where nothing made sense. Eventually, the situation concluded. I'm not going to lie and say it was some epic, climactic ending. It was more like both of us realizing this had gone on long enough. I scrambled to come up with an excuse to leave, mumbling something about work in the morning. She seemed disappointed but didn't press the issue, so I made my escape. When I got back to my hotel, I immediately jumped into the shower, scrubbing myself like I was trying to erase the whole experience from my body. I climbed into bed, exhausted, and hoped that would be the end of it. The next day, I left my phone in my hotel room while I went to work. By the time I got back, I discovered 35 missed calls from her. 35. She had also left 3 voicemails, each one 2 minutes long, where she was crying hysterically. Full-on sobbing. I listened to a few seconds of the first one before deleting all of them. I didn't respond to her calls or messages. There was no way I was going to open that door again, figuratively or literally. In hindsight, the whole experience was a mess from start to finish. I went in expecting some casual fun, and instead, I walked away with a story that still makes me cringe when I think about it. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Don't trust Craigslist photos, and maybe don't go looking for hookups in strange cities where you don't know anyone. All in all, it was a terrible situation, one I would not recommend to anyone who values their self-respect. Sure, it's a funny story now, but at the time, it was just plain awful. If you're ever tempted to do something like this, take a step back and think it through. Chances are, the potential for disaster far outweighs the slim chance of a good outcome. As for me, I'll stick to more traditional ways of meeting people from now on. Looking back, I'm still not sure what compelled me to respond to that ad in the first place. Maybe it was the novelty of trying something new, or maybe it was the anonymity of being in a city where no one knew me. Whatever the reason, I can confidently say I won't be making that mistake again. Some experiences are better left to the imagination, and this was definitely one of them. So there you have it, a cautionary tale of one man's Craigslist adventure gone horribly wrong. If nothing else, it's a reminder that sometimes it's better to swipe left than to answer an ad in the casual encounters section. I went out to get drinks with a girl I met on Craigslist. It was one of those spur-of-the-moment decisions that seemed like a good idea at the time. Low stakes, high potential for excitement, and the kind of situation that either turns into a wild story or a cautionary tale. Either way, I figured it was worth rolling the dice. We met at a bar not far from my apartment. She showed up looking better than I expected. Cute, put together, and surprisingly normal for someone I found in the depths of Craigslist. She had this nervous energy about her, though like she was trying way too hard to seem chill. I chalked it up to first meeting jitters and ordered us a couple of drinks to break the ice. A couple of drinks quickly turned into several rounds, and before I knew it, we were both completely trashed. The conversation was all over the place. One minute we were talking about movies, and the next she was confessing to sneaking booze into her sister's wedding reception. I'm not even sure how half the topics came up, but we were laughing the whole time, and the drinks just kept flowing. By the time we stumbled out of the bar, it was clear where the night was headed. She grabbed my hand as we walked back to my apartment, leaning into me like she needed me to keep her upright. It felt easy and natural, even if we were both too drunk to be making good decisions. That started to change as soon as we got to my building. She went from flirty and carefree to visibly nervous. She kept glancing around, fidgeting with her purse and wiping her palms on her jeans. I asked if she was okay, and she forced out a laugh and said, "Yeah, totally. Just drunk, I guess." We made it to the stairs, and that's when things got weird. Every step we took, she seemed to get more anxious. By the time we reached my door, she was practically drenched in sweat. I unlocked the door, and as soon as it closed behind us, she did this exaggerated, cartoonish wipe of her brow and let out a huge exhale, like she'd just finished running a marathon. At this point, I was too drunk to overthink it. I figured she was just nervous about hooking up with someone she barely knew. Makes sense, right? So I cracked a joke to lighten the mood, handed her a drink from my fridge, and things escalated from there. The sex itself was fine, nothing mind-blowing, but not terrible either. She seemed into it, although there were a couple of moments where she froze up a little before shaking it off and getting back into it. At the time, I assumed it was just the alcohol messing with her head. Now, I'm not so sure. Afterward, she didn't stick around long. She got dressed pretty quickly, gave me a quick kiss, and said something about needing to get up early. I didn't think much of it. One-night stands aren't exactly known for lingering goodbyes, so I let her go and passed out shortly after. The next morning, I woke up hungover, but feeling pretty good about how the night had gone. I figured I'd text her later and see if she wanted to hang out again, but I didn't get the chance. A couple of days later, I'm heading out to grab some groceries when I see her coming out of the apartment across the hall. At first, I thought I was still half asleep and imagining things, but nope. It was definitely her. She froze the second she saw me, her eyes going wide like a deer caught in headlights. Before I could even process what was happening, my neighbor, a guy I'd exchanged maybe 5 words with since moving in, steps out behind her. He throws his arm around her shoulders and gives me this huge grin. "Hey man, this is my girlfriend, Jess. Jess, this is my neighbor." She laughed nervously and stuck out her hand like we hadn't already had sex in my apartment less than 48 hours ago. I shook it because, honestly, what else was I supposed to do? My brain was still scrambling to catch up with the situation, and I didn't trust myself to form actual words yet. They stood there for a few more seconds, making awkward small talk, before heading out together. I just stood in the hallway like an idiot, replaying the whole thing in my head and trying to make sense of it. It didn't take long for everything to click. The nervousness at the bar, the sweating bullets on the stairs, the exaggerated sigh of relief when the door closed behind us. She wasn't nervous about hooking up with a stranger, she was nervous about getting caught. And now I was standing in the aftermath, trying to figure out whether I'd just been a drunk mistake or part of some weird game she was playing. Over the next few weeks, I saw them together constantly. Every time I left my apartment, it felt like they were there, coming in, going out, or hanging around the hallway. She always gave me this tight, forced smile whenever we crossed paths, and he was oblivious to the whole thing, chatting me up about football or complaining about parking spaces. I kept waiting for her to say something, to pull me aside and explain, but she never did. Eventually, I stopped expecting her to. She wasn't going to risk blowing up her relationship over one drunken night, and honestly, I didn't want to deal with the drama either. Still, it made things weird. Every time I heard them through the wall, I couldn't help but wonder if he knew, or if he'd find out. I started dreading the possibility of some angry knock on my door at 2 a.m., but it never came. After a couple of months, they moved out. I never found out why. Maybe he got a new job, or maybe she wanted to avoid running into me. Either way, I didn't see her again after that. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it every now and then, though. Not in a regretful way, just more like curiosity. Did she feel guilty? Was it just a random thrill for her? Or was it something else entirely? I'll probably never know, but I do know one thing. I haven't touched Craigslist Personals since. Some stories just don't need sequels. I met my last girlfriend via Craigslist, specifically through the furniture for sale section. It's not exactly the kind of origin story most people expect when they ask, "So, how did you two meet?" But that's what made it fun to tell. Watching people's faces twist in confusion when we said, "Oh, Craigslist," before we'd clarify the details, was half the fun. Anyway, it all started because I just moved into a new, larger house. I finally had enough space to put together the kind of entertainment room I'd always wanted. Big screen, surround sound, the works. The only thing missing was the seating. I didn't want to just throw a couple of random couches in there. I wanted theater seating. Big, plush, reclining chairs. Something that made it clear this was a room for movies, not casual small talk. I browsed Craigslist, figuring I could save some money buying used instead of dropping a fortune at a furniture store. After scrolling past an endless sea of ugly mismatched junk, I found them. 3 gorgeous leather recliners in perfect condition. The kind that looked like they belonged in a home theater showroom. I shot off an email asking if they were still available, half expecting to get ghosted or scammed, but the seller got back to me within an hour. We exchanged a few emails to sort out the details, and I agreed to drive about 45 minutes out of town to pick them up. Up until that point, it was just a straightforward transaction. She gave me the address, I loaded the chairs onto my truck, and that should have been the end of it. But then, as I was getting ready to leave, something stopped me. I don't know if it was the way she smiled when we shook hands, or the fact that she was ridiculously beautiful, way more than I'd expected for someone selling furniture online, but I suddenly felt like I'd regret it if I didn't say something. That's when the thought hit me, you may only pass this way but once. Now, I'm not exactly Casanova, so what came out of my mouth next was awkward, to say the least. I asked if there were any good places to eat nearby, and mentioned I was in the mood for sushi. Smooth, right? She paused for a second, and I thought, well, that's it. She's either married, taken, or completely creeped out by me. But then she smiled, this warm, almost amused smile, and told me about a sushi place just a few minutes down the road. That should have been the end of it, but for some reason, I didn't let it go. I took a deep breath, pushed past the nerves, and asked if she'd want to join me. I'll never forget the way she tilted her head and said, "You know what? I'm actually kind of hungry too." I couldn't believe it. One minute I was picking up chairs from a stranger, and the next I was sitting across from her at a sushi restaurant, learning about her life. It turned out the chairs had been bought for her ex-boyfriend, who had taken off shortly after she set up the entertainment room. She'd held on to them for a while, not ready to let go, but finally decided to sell them and make a fresh start. We bonded over that, the whole idea of starting over. She had just gotten out of a bad relationship, and I had just moved to a new town where I didn't know many people. By the time dinner was over, it felt like we'd known each other for years. We laughed, we drank a little sake, and we both pretended not to notice how long we were lingering after the check had already been paid. From there, things moved fast but naturally. We started texting almost immediately, and by the end of the week, we'd already gone out again. This time intentionally, not as an add-on to a Craigslist deal. She helped me set up the chairs in my entertainment room, and I helped her rearrange her apartment since she'd finally cleared out the last reminders of her ex. Before long, the chairs became our chairs. Movie nights at my place turned into lazy Sunday mornings and late-night conversations about everything from bad exes to dream vacations. Those chairs saw everything, the early butterflies, the first I love you, and even the petty arguments about what movie to watch. And no one ever believed us when we told them how we met. People assumed we were joking, or that we'd met online in some more conventional way, like a dating app. But we always let them sit in the confusion for a minute before dropping the real story. It became a party trick of sorts, watching their faces cycle through shock, disbelief, and amusement. I won't pretend it was some perfect fairy tale romance. We had our ups and downs, like any couple. There were fights about dumb things, compromises we didn't always want to make, and moments where we both wondered if we were moving too fast. But there were also a lot of good times, camping trips, concerts, and lazy weekends where we barely left the couch. Eventually, though, life got in the way. She got a new job that required her to move out of state, and I wasn't ready to leave the home I'd just settled into. We tried long distance for a while, but anyone who's done that knows how hard it is to keep the momentum going when you're not in the same place. When we finally called it quits, it wasn't dramatic or messy, just sad. We both knew it wasn't working anymore, but neither of us wanted to be the one to say it out loud. When she came by one last time to pick up some things she'd left at my place, we ended up sitting in those chairs, watching a movie like we had so many times before. After she left, I thought about selling the chairs, just to get rid of the memories. But I didn't. They're still in my entertainment room, and every time I sit in them, I can't help but smile a little. This is not my personal experience. Let me make that clear up front. This is just one of many bizarre sexual encounters a friend of mine has facilitated through Craigslist. He's the kind of guy who treats Craigslist like his personal dating app, but with lower stakes and even lower standards. He actually refers to it as his go-to girl, and judging by the sheer number of stories he's told me over the years, it seems to work out surprisingly well for him. Now, before you start picturing him as some suave ladies' man, let me stop you right there. He's not. He's a regular dude, average-looking, slightly out of shape, and definitely not winning any fashion awards. What sets him apart, though, is his complete lack of shame or hesitation. He's the type who'll answer any ad without overthinking it, and more often than not, he ends up with a story to tell. This particular story starts with him responding to one of those couples' ads, the kind where a husband and wife are looking for a third. He'd answered a few of these before, so it wasn't uncharted territory for him, but this one stood out because it seemed classier than usual. No grainy photos or poorly worded descriptions, just a straightforward post that made it clear they were experienced and knew what they wanted. So he messages them, they exchange a few emails, and before he knows it, he's got an address and a time to show up. He told me he wasn't expecting much, probably a cramped apartment with mismatched furniture and a questionable smell. But when he pulled up, he realized this was something else entirely. The house was big. Not mansion level, but definitely a step above your typical suburban home. It had a long driveway, a manicured lawn, and those kinds of oversized windows that rich people seem to love. He told me it looked like the kind of place you'd see in a movie where someone gets murdered during a dinner party. Anyway, he knocks on the door, and the couple greets him. The wife was in her early 30s, blonde, fit, and pretty enough that he started wondering what the hell she was doing with the guy next to her. The husband, on the other hand, was in his 50s, slightly overweight, and had that look of someone who made decent money and knew it. My friend said he was wearing a sweater that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe. They invite him in, and right away, he notices the house is just as nice on the inside as it is on the outside. Hardwood floors, expensive-looking furniture, even a billiard room with a snooker table. They offer him a glass of wine, and before long, they're all sitting around chatting like old friends. The husband does most of the talking, asking my friend about his job, his hobbies, and his past experiences with threesomes. The wife chimes in here and there, but mostly, she just sips her wine and gives him this look that he described as hungry. Eventually, the conversation starts shifting in a more sexual direction, and before long, the wife stands up and says she's going to go get more comfortable. She disappears into the bedroom, leaving my friend and the husband alone. This is where things start to deviate. Instead of following her or giving my friend any kind of instructions, the husband just pours himself another glass of wine and sits back in his chair like he's settling in for a show. When the wife comes back, she's wearing nothing but lingerie, and the husband gives my friend a nod and says, "Let her have it." Now, my friend is the kind of guy who doesn't need to be told twice. He starts making out with her, and within minutes, they're going at it right there in the living room. The whole time, the husband just sits in his chair, sipping wine and watching with this weird, satisfied smile on his face. According to my friend, it was one of the strangest experiences of his life. He kept waiting for the husband to join in, or at least do something other than watch, but it never happened. The guy just sat there, completely content to let someone else take care of his wife. And it didn't stop after the first round. My friend says they had sex 2, maybe 3 times in a row, all while the husband stayed right where he was. At one point, he even topped off their glasses of wine, like it was the most normal thing in the world. By the end of it, my friend was exhausted. He said the wife was insatiable, and the husband seemed genuinely thrilled by the whole thing. When it was finally over, they thanked him, handed him another drink, and made casual small talk like they hadn't just spent the past couple of hours treating him like a living sex toy. He left shortly after, still trying to wrap his head around what had just happened. On the drive home, he kept replaying it in his head, trying to figure out the dynamic between them. Was the husband into voyeurism? Cuckolding? Or was it something else entirely? He never got an answer. They emailed him a couple of times afterward, inviting him back, but he never took them up on it. Not because it was bad, he actually said it was one of the better Craigslist hookups he'd had, but because it felt off. Like there was more going on under the surface than they were letting on, and he didn't really want to find out what it was. A few years ago, I heard this absolutely wild story about a guy in Europe who posted a Craigslist ad looking for someone planning to commit suicide. But here's the kicker. He didn't want to stop them or talk them out of it. No, he wanted them to go through with it in his home, so he could eat them afterward. Yeah, you read that right. Eat them. When I first heard it, I thought it was one of those urban legends people throw around at parties to creep each other out, but the more I dug into it, the more it seemed like it might actually be true. Apparently, the ad was straightforward. No weird metaphors or vague descriptions. Just a guy openly looking for someone who was ready to die and didn't mind becoming dinner in the process. The details of the case, at least what I could piece together, are equal parts disturbing and fascinating. From what I've read, the guy was surprisingly normal on the surface. No history of violent crimes, no bizarre public behavior that would have tipped anyone off. He was the kind of person you'd pass in the grocery store without giving a second glance. But behind closed doors, he had some of the darkest desires imaginable. The ad itself was chilling in its simplicity. He described wanting to share an intimate experience with someone willing to end their life, promising a safe and comfortable environment to do it in. Safe and comfortable, as if that somehow made it less horrifying. The worst part? People actually responded. Apparently, there's a corner of the internet where this kind of stuff doesn't just exist, it thrives. Forums, chat rooms, and hidden communities where people discuss their darkest thoughts, including fantasies about cannibalism. For most, it stays as fantasy, but this guy decided to take it a step further and make it real. The police caught wind of it when someone who saw the ad decided it was creepy enough to report. At first, it sounded too insane to be taken seriously, but when investigators looked into it, they realized it wasn't a hoax. The ad was real, and so was the man who posted it. From what I understand, they set up a sting operation to catch him. An undercover officer posed as someone who fit the profile he was looking for, suicidal and willing to meet. They exchanged messages, during which the man went into shocking detail about what he planned to do after the person died. He described the process step by step, even talking about how he'd prepare the body for consumption. When the day of the meeting arrived, the police raided his home. What they found inside sounded like something out of a horror movie. The guy had his house set up like he was hosting a dinner party, but for one guest, and that guest wasn't supposed to leave. There were tools, cooking supplies, and even a freezer cleared out to store what he didn't eat right away. He didn't deny anything either. Once he was caught, he admitted to the entire plan without hesitation, almost like he didn't understand why everyone was so horrified. He even tried to argue that it wasn't technically a crime because the other person was supposed to consent to it. That's the kind of mental gymnastics that makes you question how some people's brains work. I remember reading about how investigators combed through his computer and found years' worth of disturbing content, videos, pictures, and chats with other people who shared similar fantasies. He'd been obsessed with the idea for a long time, but for some reason, this was the moment he decided to act on it. What's even more unsettling is that cases like this aren't as rare as you'd hope. Every now and then, you hear about people getting caught with similar ads or engaging in these dark corners of the internet. Most don't go as far as actually trying to make it happen, but the fact that there's enough interest to sustain entire online communities is unsettling in itself. I can't help but wonder what kind of person responds to an ad like that. Were they genuinely suicidal and saw it as a way to end things while fulfilling someone else's twisted fantasy? Or were they just as messed up as the guy posting the ad and looking for a chance to be part of something horrifying? Either way, it's hard to wrap your head around. The thing that stuck with me most about the story, though, is how normal the guy seemed on the surface. It's easy to think of people like that as monsters, crazy, wild-eyed lunatics who can't blend into regular society. But the reality is often more unsettling. They look just like everyone else, which makes it harder to spot them until it's too late. After the arrest, the story blew up in the media, but it also faded pretty quickly. People have short attention spans, especially when something makes them uncomfortable. I tried to keep up with the case for a while, but eventually, the updates stopped coming, and I never found out what kind of sentence he ended up with. I love looking through Craigslist ads for shits and giggles. It's like people watching but with extra weirdness. Sometimes it's just harmless stuff. Someone trying to sell a broken lawnmower for way too much money, or offering free kittens that look like they've survived the apocalypse. But every so often, you find something so bizarre you can't help but click. That's exactly what happened the day I stumbled across an ad asking for a female model. The ad emphasized, in all caps, no nudity, like that was supposed to make it sound completely legitimate. Because obviously, if there's no nudity involved, there's nothing sketchy going on, right? Still, I couldn't help myself. I was curious. I wanted to know what this guy's angle was, so I decided to message him. I kept it simple. Hi, saw your ad. What exactly are you looking for in a model? I figured he'd either ghost me or respond with something vague and slightly creepy, but to my surprise, he got back to me almost immediately. His response was unexpected, to say the least. He said he wanted me to wear yoga shorts and rollerblades and have someone film me skating around. Then, at some point, I'd need to fall, wipe out hard enough to scrape my knee. After that, I was supposed to take detailed photos of myself tending to the scrape. We're talking disinfecting it, putting on ointment, applying a Band-Aid, the whole process. And for all of this, he offered me $100. I had to read the email twice just to make sure I wasn't missing something. Nope. That was the entire gig. Skating, falling, and documenting a scraped knee like it was some kind of medical fetish photo shoot. At first I laughed. It was ridiculous. Who pays someone to intentionally injure themselves? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how specific it was. This wasn't just some random request. This guy had clearly put a lot of thought into it. And that's what made it even weirder. I started imagining scenarios where this would make sense. Was it some kind of weird safety awareness campaign? Maybe a first aid instructional video? But no, that didn't add up. Why specify yoga shorts? Why rollerblades? And why focus so much on the wound care? The only explanation I could come up with was that this guy had a fetish. Not a normal one, either. Something hyper-specific, like skin knee caregiving or girls in distress. And once that thought hit me, I couldn't stop picturing him sitting in his basement, scrolling through Craigslist and waiting for someone to take the bait. I'll admit, for about 5 seconds, I actually considered doing it. $100 isn't life-changing, but it's enough to make you pause and weigh your options. I even imagined how I'd pull it off, borrowing a pair of rollerblades, practicing a convincing fall, and making sure the scrape looked bad, but not bad enough to leave a scar. The whole thing played out in my head like a bad rom-com montage. But then reality set in. What if this wasn't just a video thing? What if he wanted to meet in person? Or worse, what if he asked for more after seeing the photos? I started picturing myself tied up in some guy's basement next to a shrine of rollerblades and Band-Aids, and that was enough to shut the idea down completely. Still, I couldn't shake the curiosity. I decided to email him again, not to take the job, but to see if I could get more information. I asked him why he wanted the photos and what he planned to do with them. His response was polite but vague. He said he was working on a project and needed realistic images for reference purposes. That's it. No further details. When I pushed him for more, he stopped responding altogether. The whole thing left me equal parts fascinated and creeped out. On one hand, it was harmless compared to some of the other stuff lurking on Craigslist. At least he wasn't asking for nudes or offering to pay for dirty socks. But on the other hand, it made me wonder just how many people out there have these secret fetishes that never see the light of day, until they do. And it's not like this was a one-off thing. After that, I started noticing more ads with weirdly specific requests. One guy wanted photos of women's feet covered in mud. Another offered $50 for someone to sit on balloons until they popped. My personal favorite was the guy who wanted to pay women to eat messy foods, spaghetti, barbecue ribs, stuff like that, while wearing formal dresses. The ad itself seemed legit, although the rent was so low it was a bit questionable. Being a broke college student, I figured why the hell not at least check it out. The address given turned out to be a run-down lower middle-class house, not an apartment building like I was expecting. Okay, so it's someone renting out part of their house. Not my thing, and I'm about to put the car in reverse, when a middle-aged man with a huge beard comes out the front door. He's so excited that someone answered his ad. Well, all right, I'm here. Might as well see the place. We go in the front door, and he's showing me the first floor, while I'm looking about for the entrance to the apartment. Oh, he says, it's upstairs. Upstairs turns out to be just that, up a flight of stairs. There's no private door or entrance. It just opens up to a huge room. A huge room crammed full of mismatched second-hand beds and dressers. There's barely room to walk. I got all the furniture myself, he says proudly. I figure I can fit probably 20 girls up here. There's a shower downstairs that you all can use. I just feel real bad for college-age girls that ain't got no place to live. Did all this myself, so that you girls can have a place to stay. I don't care if you'll run around in your underwear and have pillow fights. Just have a good time. My only rules are no guys in the house, you know? I screwed a crazy from Craigslist once. She was nuts. I was in Tucson, Arizona, trying to sort my life out, and I wanted to make new friends. So I posted in the strictly platonic section explaining who I was, and that I was looking for a pal or two. After a few days I get some responses, and everything seems cool. So around the fourth response was an attractive female. Large but not fat, curvy but not chubby, so physically she was right up my alley, but since it was the platonic section, I wasn't expecting anything to come of it. Anyway, we meet up at the duck pond, and we're chatting it up, and things are going smooth, almost too smooth. I wasn't even laying groundwork, just being a friendly dude, and she was moving in on me, moving in fast. I say why the fuck not, and roll with it, and we end up at her place, since I was crashing on my sister's couch. As soon as I walk in, I see terrariums. Seriously. All over her house were tanks of snakes, and I'm not talking about a snake enthusiast with around 4 to 5 pets. I'm talking full-out snake breeder for the sake of keeping them for minions and taking over the world. This chick could tie all of them together and go cave diving and shit. But seriously, snakes all over. That was bad enough, but my dick isn't saying no, although my head was screaming GTFO dipshit. Anyway, we do the deed, and it was hardly enjoyable considering I was watching all around me for her to command the boas to hold me down, so she could rip my head off and feed me to her friends. As I lay there and say it's getting late and I should roll out, I hear someone coming into the apartment. So I ask her if she has a roommate. No, well yes. Sorta. This is the moment where I've got my shoes in my hands and my shirt slung over my shoulder bolting for the window when she says this. No, it's not what you think. I relax a little bit, hoping to hear her say it was her brother or some other relative, as long as they wouldn't hurt me for banging the snake queen. It's my ex-boyfriend. We split up a week ago, and we decided to stay living together. I'm figuratively shitting myself. I head again for the window when this burly-ass lumberjack beast of a bear man built like a brick shit house walks right into the room and continues to the bathroom to get something. All the while I'm standing in my boxers with my pants around my ankles and my shirt over my shoulder. He emerges from the bathroom about 5 seconds later with one hand behind his back, and I'm sure it's all over, but I'm frozen solid with fear and can't move an inch. He speaks. Hey dude. I respond, hey. He advances toward me, and the chick is freaking out about her fucking snakes like, don't hurt my baby's Chad. You be careful in here. And he pulls from behind his back the metal shower curtain rod he ripped from the wall in the bathroom. I boogie. I dash for the window as quick as you can with your pants around your ankles, and try to crawl out. He swings that rod and fucking whips it over my ass just as I fall out into the yard. I throw my shoes on and pull up my pants with speed comparable to that of Sonic the Hedgehog on cocaine, and jump fences until I don't recognize where I am or how long Eve been running. I call my sister from a payphone and get her to pick me up, never using Craigslist to meet people again. A lady came to buy our old coffee table off Craigslist. It was nothing fancy, just a basic wooden coffee table we'd had for years, with a few scratches and dents that gave it character, or at least that's what I told myself when we were trying to sell it. We listed it for $20, mainly to get it out of the house without feeling like we were throwing it away. When she showed up, she seemed normal enough. Middle-aged, well-dressed, and driving a decent car. Nothing about her screamed serial killer or hoarder, which is always a plus when you're meeting strangers off the internet. She walked up, looked over the table, and said, "This will work perfectly. I need new furniture because my house just burned down." My partner and I froze for a second. I mean, what do you even say to that? We were halfway through loading the table into her car, and suddenly this turned into the world's most awkward therapy session. Finally, one of us managed to blurt out, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." She just shrugged and gave us this calm, almost cheerful smile. "It's no big deal. No big deal. I don't know about you, but if my house burned down, I'd be a wreck." Meanwhile, this lady was out here furniture shopping like it was just another Tuesday. She wasn't crying, she wasn't stressed, she was completely unbothered. Honestly, it was kind of impressive. Still, we felt bad for her, so we decided to let her have the table for free. It felt like the least we could do. We even started carrying it to her car for her when she interrupted us. "Oh, it's no problem," she said, reaching into her purse. "I have plenty of money. I just don't have any stuff because my house burned down." And with that, she handed us the $20 like it was nothing. Now we were extra confused. Who loses everything in a fire and immediately bounces back like this? I'm not saying I expected her to show up in rags with soot stains on her face, but something about how casual she was felt off. Still, we thanked her, handed over the table, and offered our condolences again, figuring that was the polite thing to do. "We're so sorry that your house burned down," we said, fully expecting her to finally drop the upbeat act and admit that, yeah, it had been a pretty rough week. Instead, she looked us dead in the eye and said, "It's okay. I'm used to it. Used to it." What do you even say to that? My brain immediately started spiraling. How many houses does someone have to burn down before they get used to it? Was she cursed? Did she have the world's worst luck with electrical wiring? Or, and this was the theory my partner whispered the second she drove off, was she an arsonist? Because let's be honest, nobody casually drops, "I'm used to it," unless this isn't their first fire, or their second, or their third. For the rest of the day, we couldn't stop talking about it. We kept replaying the conversation, trying to figure out what we missed. Maybe she was joking, and we just didn't pick up on it. Or maybe she'd been through so much trauma that this was her way of coping. Either way, we were officially creeped out. Later that night, we started Googling house fires in the area, half expecting to find some news report about a string of mysterious blazes. We didn't, but that almost made it worse. What if she was just really good at covering her tracks? I couldn't shake the image of her driving away with that coffee table, smiling like she hadn't just dropped the weirdest bombshell on us. Did she already have a plan for the table? Or was it destined to go up in flames, too? And what kind of person collects furniture immediately after a fire? Wouldn't you be dealing with insurance claims, or trying to find a place to stay? But no, this lady was out here bargain hunting like she just Marie Kondo'd her house instead of watching it burn to the ground. Over the next few weeks, I kept expecting her to pop back up. Maybe she'd call about more furniture, or maybe we'd see her name in the news after yet another house fire. But she never did. It was like she disappeared as quickly as she arrived, leaving us with nothing but questions and a very crisp $20 bill. To this day, I still don't know what her deal was. I've told this story to so many people, and every single one has the same reaction. WTF, lady? When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29, and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me, and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a, "Thanks?" I mean, I looked nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I looked like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth," and then there would be this long awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kind of looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure, and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she startled doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies, and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received in 40-plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out. I guess everyone has heard about a Craigslist horror story, but no one expects to end up in one. I'd been thinking about leaving the city life behind for a while now. I guess I couldn't stand the bustle of the city anymore, and longed for a more remote life. I'd saved up quite a bit of money over the years, and decided to buy a house. When I saw the prices though, my jaw dropped. I'd expected that buying a house was expensive, but I'd never thought that expensive. In my desperation, I opened Craigslist. I didn't expect to find anything there, but that's exactly what I did. The ad was as simple as it could be. Small house for sale, way below market value. I clicked on it in an instant. When I saw the price though, I was sure the seller had made a mistake. There was no way someone would sell a house that cheap. The place looked decent from what I saw in the pictures. Eventually, I found the seller's phone number and called him. I honestly expected the price to be a mistake. Hell, maybe it was all a scam. Instead, I found myself on a call with a man named Wilbert Johnson. When he told me the place was still available, the first thing I asked about was the price. The old man assured me there was no mistake. It was an old house, he said, in the middle of nowhere, and he wanted to get the sale over with as soon as possible. There was a catch, though. He wanted the payment in cash only because he didn't trust the banks or any of the real estate agents. Some other people had shown interest before me, he said, but they'd all gotten cold feet at the mention of this. I didn't see a problem with it. Hell, things would be way quicker that way. I guess that was my first mistake. To make a long story short, a week later, on a Saturday morning, I found myself on the 3-hour drive to old Wilbert's house, which I hoped would soon be mine. When I arrived, the old man greeted me with a bright smile. He was a sturdy, hard man in his late 50s, from what I could tell. "You Mark?" he asked as he reached out to greet me. I nodded. "Yes, sir." "Well, that's the place," he said and stepped aside to allow me a better view of the small house. I had to look around for a bit before I stepped inside. The moment I did, the old floorboards welcomed me with a loud creak. The moment it happened, an anxious expression washed over the man's face. "Guess you were right," I said laughing. "The place is pretty old." "It sure has character, though." When he heard that, relief flooded over his face, and his smile returned. "Oh, that it has. Been living here for over 30-odd years. Now then, how come you're selling it that cheap?" The old man was quiet for a bit. His eyes wandered for a bit before he sighed. "Tell you what, there's no reason to keep it to myself. It's because of Lisa's disappearance." "Lisa?" Another sigh followed. "My wife, Elizabeth. Been almost 2 months now since she vanished. Walked right out that door over there and never returned. No one's seen her, no one's heard a thing. Just like that, vanished without a trace." "Shit, I'm so sorry. I'd no idea, Dash. Nothing to do with you." He cut me off. "Did everything I could, talked to the neighbors, then the cops. Hell, they searched half the damned county, but they found nothing. I kept searching, but by now..." His voice trailed off as he shook his head. "Can't keep living here. Everything reminds me of her. That painting over there, she drew it a good 20 years ago. See that tablecloth? She bought it at a flea market a couple of years back. Isn't it beautiful, Wilbert?" she asked. "Been stuck with the ugly thing ever since. Whenever I see it, I can't help but wonder where she went and what happened to her. It's just too much," he broke up, his voice trailing off. I stood there, shuffling around, not sure what to say. I was never good at those things, people things, I mean. After a few moments, I opened my mouth when I heard something. It was a small, quiet sound, like scratching. In a moment, old Wilbert stepped up to an old radio and turned it on. I stared at him as the music drowned out the sound. "Sir, what are you, Dash?" When he noticed my stares, he looked embarrassed and turned the radio back off again. "Well, that's another reason the place is so cheap. So what's causing it? Ghosts?" I stared at him, but his expression didn't change. I opened my mouth to inquire what the hell was up with that when he burst out laughing. "Goddamn it, I'm pulling your leg. It's rodents. We've had problems with the damned beasts for half a decade now. Dunno where the buggers come from, but they sure are persistent. They're digging through the dirt outside and crawl into the walls. Never been able to figure out how they do it. Might as well be a cat in there, too. Heard they sometimes crawl after mice or cat and end up getting stuck." I shrugged. "Well, I planned on renovating the place, anyway. Remember you telling me about that. I've got quite a bit of junk stored up. Been planning to give the place a good old once-over myself, but with Lisa going missing and all that, I never had time to do it." With that, he led me to his garage and presented me with an assortment of tools and materials. "Tell you what, I'll add all of it to the house for free. God knows, I can't take it with me anyway, and I sure as hell won't need it anymore. Take it as an apology for not telling you about the rodents beforehand." I thanked the old man wholeheartedly. Looking at the amount of stuff here, I might well be looking at $50,000, hell, maybe even more. We talked more while the old man led me through the house. Here and there he stopped me and told me what sort of renovations he'd planned and gave me detailed advice. "Start with the second floor, use this and that material, do this that way, and so on." It sounded like solid advice, and I could tell the old man knew what he was talking about. Once the tour was over, we shook on the sale, and I arranged to be back in a few days to finalize everything. The old man, in turn, told me he'd put together a little write-up of all his renovation advice. Once I was back, and I handed him the money, he sighed again. "Guess there's one last thing I've got to tell you. This place, well, it's got a history." I looked up. First the rodents and now what? "It's probably all nonsense." He started shaking his head. "But Lisa always talked about that stuff. She said back in the day when folks still owned slaves, there's been a lynching out here. Never gave much of a damn about those old tales, but..." This time I couldn't help but laugh. Was he pulling my leg again? Tell you what, I never believed in any of it, but Lisa swore she heard wailing and crying in the middle of the night. To be honest, I think it's just those damned kids down by the creek. "What kids?" "There's this old shack down by the creek, not too far from here. Some local kids, teenagers mostly, hang out there getting drunk and causing all kinds of trouble during the night. Well, it doesn't sound like anything I can't handle." It was a few minutes later that we shock on the deal. The old man handed me his notes and told me he'd written down his phone number. If I had questions about the renovations, I should call him. Once he'd driven off, I stared at what would be my new home. Quite the place, I thought. Sure, I'd have to put in quite a bit of work, but there was no way I'd get a cheap property anywhere. For the first couple of nights, I didn't sleep in the place. There was still all the old man's furniture in there. No, to feel comfortable here, I'd have to get rid of his stuff first. To be honest, it felt weird, disposing of someone's entire life and memories like that. Even worse was the damned scratching. It was there again and again. Sometimes it was quiet, sometimes it was more frantic. Maybe there really was a cat stuck somewhere. I shuddered a bit. I liked cats, and I didn't want to think about one of them suffocating in my walls. The next day my friend Mike arrived. I'd told him about the house I was buying, and he said he'd be happy to help me out with the renovations. To be honest, I think he wanted to get away from his wife and kids for a bit. Do some good old handy work, and share a couple of cool ones with an old buddy. Well, it's quite the place. You really got it that cheap? Yeah, it's because the place is haunted, and there are mice in the walls, and rats and cats. Mike gave me a weird look. Come on in, I tell you all about it over a beer or two. As the two of us sat on the floor in what would one day be my kitchen, I told him all about old Wilbert and the stories he'd told me. As if to prove that I wasn't bullshitting him, the frantic scratching started again for a moment. He listened intently. Doesn't sound like mice to me. Could be rats, though. We're better of getting some poison, or call an exterminator. I considered it for a moment, but then I shook my head. If we get an exterminator, they'll cover the entire place in chemicals or God knows what. I'd rather get started on the renovations. Mike shrugged. Well, I warned you, don't blame me if we find some giant rat colony in one of the walls here. We shared another beer before we started on the work. There was a lot to do. The floorboards were old and rotten in many places. The wallpaper was stained and old-fashioned, and some partition walls had to go, I decided. Either way, we had a busy few days ahead of us, hell, maybe even a week. It wasn't long before we retorted to the old man's method of turning on the radio. The scratching, while quiet, was still somewhat distracting. Mike and I made some decent progress the first day. At first, he wanted to get himself a hotel room in the nearby town, but after a bit of back and forth, he agreed to stay. We spent the evenings talking about old stories from high school and college, and often Mike would tell me about his wife and kids. As much as he told me he was happy to have some time away, I could tell he missed them already. During our third night at the place, he woke me up in the middle of the night. "Dude, you hearing this?" he asked me in a quiet, hushed voice. As I listened, I could hear the scratching, but there was something else. It was quiet, coming from quite a distance, but I was sure I heard it. It sounded as if someone was wailing or crying. I thought back to the old man's story about the lynching and what his wife had heard. Then I shook my head and remembered what he'd told me about the kids out here. Probably some drunk kids fucking around. The old dude told me they're gathering down by the creek to get drunk. Maybe they thought it was fun to mess with the new guy. Mike nodded, but he still looked unnerved. Yeah, guess you're right. Want to go out and teach them a lesson? I laughed but shook my head. There was no way I'd go out in the middle of the night to chase some teenagers. I also didn't want to become known as the local crazy guy. Eventually, we got back to sleep. Still, somehow my mind lingered on the story. That scratching, that wailing, there was something about it that didn't seem to fit. The next day, busy with renovations again, I'd already pushed all those thoughts away. Guess that was my second mistake. We doubled down on our efforts. Me trying to find a hint of those damned rodents, and Mike most likely wanting to get out of here. He'd always been the superstitious type. When the wailing started again on the fourth night, Mike told me he'd get a hotel room if it would persist. I retorted that it was those kids again, but this time he wouldn't have it. Yeah, so you're telling me there's some group of kids out there that got nothing better to do in the middle of the night? 2 times in a row. Fuck man, I don't know. Maybe it's a cat stuck somewhere. I sure as hell don't believe there are any freaking ghosts. Mike grunted, but said nothing. For a while, I considered going out there to figure out who or what was causing it, but not long after I drifted off to sleep again. At this point, we were on the 5th day of renovations. The place was almost barren by now. We'd started on the upper floor first. After that, we'd taken down the partition walls and had stripped down the old wallpaper. Not knowing too much about renovations myself, I'd followed the old man's guidelines almost to the letter. That was my third mistake. So, what else you want me to take care of? Well, you could clean the garage for starters, and that lawn looks like it hasn't been cut in months. All right, hilarious Mark, he said when he saw the enormous grin on my face. Tell you what, I started. How about we take a bit of a break for the rest of the day? Tomorrow we take care of the floorboards down here, And that's it. God knows those need to be replaced. As if to prove what I'd said, I switched my balance a bit, and the floorboards creaked in answer. Sounds good, but if we hear any weird noises again, I'm out of here. I sighed but nodded. Then I realized something. I had heard none of the scratching today. Maybe our ruckus had driven off whatever rodents had infested the place. I didn't know a damn thing about mice or rats. That night we sat together until long after midnight. I'd brought out my old laptop, and we spent the time with some old movies and a bottle of whiskey. Not a sound was heard all night. No more scratching, and sure as hell no wailing. Told you there are no ghosts here, I slurred. Yeah, whatever, Mike said laughing. Taking care of the old floorboards was much tougher than I'd imagined, with a hangover that is. Still, somehow we made decent enough progress, and by noon we were done with the first half of the house. Guess those rats really are gone, aren't they? I shrugged. Guess so, not a sound. To be honest, I half expected them to linger below those old boards. Sure hope they stay the hell away. We continued joking around and having a good time. It all changed when we found the basement. As we removed the floorboards in the old man's storage room, we stumbled upon an old hatch. Once our initial surprise was over, we pried it open, revealing a staircase. All right, man, what the hell? The basement, I guess, I said matter-of-factly. Yeah, I ain't blind, but why the hell's it hidden like that? Things still hadn't clicked. Who knows, maybe he just didn't use it. Hell, maybe it was infested by rodents, so he sealed it off. Yeah, or it's his secret serial killer basement. Dude, not funny, I cursed. All right, you want to check it out? As I looked down the dark stairs that led, somewhere below a feeling of apprehension washed over me. I didn't feel so sure about my words anymore. Finally, I nodded. We each got a hold of a flashlight and started our descent. There was no light down there, and for a moment I half expected the old hatch to be thrown shut by no other than old Wilbert himself. Shit, man, this is creepy, I mumbled. Will you stop? I don't like this any more than you do. Once we'd made it down the stairs, we found ourselves in a small, damp room. It was empty. Small, isn't it? Sure is, I said. The entire basement was no bigger than one of the rooms above. Wasn't a basement usually the same size as the house? At least there are no rats, I said. Yeah, but this wall here's kinda weird. What do you mean? Well, he started. Look at the moss and the dirt on all the others. This one's different. Looks kinda new to me. Now that he'd said it, I noticed it too. Sure, the wall was as damp as the rest, but there was no moss on it or anything. I watched as Mike reached out his hand and knocked against the wall. What are you doing? I asked. Shuh, he shushed me. He went to one of the other walls and knocked there, then came back and knocked again. Sounds hollow. We both stared at each other. You think that's where the rodents came from? A minute later we were down there again, starting to tear down the wall. After a few heavy hits, the first of the bricks collapsed inwards. I instinctively took a step back, expecting rats or mice to pour from the hole, but there was nothing. We inched forward, peeking into the hole, and that's when we realized what this was. The second half of the basement. Mike had already gotten his flashlight and beamed inside. At first, we saw nothing, but then we saw something on the floor. No, not something. There's someone inside, I pressed out. We redoubled our efforts, and soon we'd broken down enough of the wall to enter. The person inside had long gray hair, wore a dirty nightgown, and was female. The old woman's face was frozen into a mask of perpetual terror, and she was without a doubt dead. When I saw the long, bloody scratch marks all over the walls, it finally clicked. A moment later I was back upstairs and called to police, telling them what I'd found. There was no need for them to tell me the woman's name. The moment I'd understood what was going on here, I knew who she was. It was Elizabeth Johnson, the old man's wife. Everyone has heard Craigslist horror stories, but last night I experienced one firsthand. For about a week I have been speaking to a guy regarding a laptop I wanted to buy. After a slew of cancellations due to family issues, he eventually gave me an address that checked out on Google Maps yesterday and organized pickup that evening. On arrival at the address, he said to give him a call, but wouldn't give me an app number. I was given some extremely vague directions in broken English, and eventually an app number that didn't exist in that complex. My alarm bells started ringing, and I made my way back to my car. From across the road, a figure appeared. He was head to toe in black with a balaclava on. To my horror, in his left hand, he had a machete that went from his knee to his foot. "Hey buddy, give me the fucking money," was all he said. Panicking, I started backpedaling down the road, and luckily a bus came round the corner. I flagged it down screaming for help, however the bus driver wouldn't stop to let me on. At this point, I thought, shit, this is it. Luckily another car was driving up, which I managed to scramble to. Obviously, I shocked them, and they simply put their windows up, signaled to the bus, which had stopped, maybe realizing that something was up. The driver finally let me on, and people moved to the back of the bus, obviously thinking I was some crazed lunatic. No one offered me any help, and crying my eyes out, clearly distressed, I dialed 911. I was picked up at production station by the police and driven back to the scene, where there was a number of dog units on hand. This process took 15 minutes, so the guy was long gone. During this whole time, the guy was still texting me asking where I was. I have received a number of calls since. There are too many coincidences for it to seem like an opportunist thief hanging out in the bushes that just so happened to try to mug a guy that was buying a laptop. I was asked via text, what color car are you driving, and what color jacket you wearing, and the whole meet me on a pathway near a unit that doesn't exist is also suspect. I know I'm going to receive the usual, how could you be so stupid comments, but I just wanted to share the experience on the off chance anyone has had the same thing happen to them. I use Craigslist a lot to buy and sell. I never thought this would happen to me. And the fact I still don't know if it was a setup or not really bugs me. The ad is still up, which just adds to the mystery. I really love Craigslist. I'd estimate I've met maybe 300 people for buying/selling stuff, and for the most part, everyone was nice and harmless. However, I did run into a creep who made me rethink meeting strangers alone to sell stuff. FYI, I was an early 20s female at the time. It's 2009, and I'm staying with my parents for the Christmas holidays in a small town in Florida. I'm going through my childhood room and cleaning out the closet and find a giant CD holder full of maybe 100 really shitty CDs. Think Nickelback, Aqua, Chumbawamba. It's the 21st century. No one uses CDs anymore. I figure I'd try to sell the CDs on Craigslist. I put up a listing. 100 CDs from the late 90s and early to mid 2000s, mix of pop and rock. All for $35 OBO. The next day, I get an email from a guy named John around 2 p.m. He says that he's in town temporarily and that he wants the CDs. He says he can pick them up after dinner around 8 p.m. I email him back my address and number and tell him to text or call when he's on his way. 8 p.m. comes and goes. I figure I've been stood up, which happens often on Craigslist. No big deal. My dad works for a liquor distribution company and would often do demonstration nights at restaurants and bars and would come home at bar closing time. This night, he gets home at around 3 a.m. I'm in college and a total night owl, so I'm still up probably eating junk food, surfing the web, and watching horror flicks. I hear a car pull up, look out the window, and see him sitting in his car eating food. He often stops at Taco Bell on his way home and eats it in his car, so my mom doesn't know he's cheating on his diet. Maybe 10 minutes later, my dad comes in and shouts my name. Pizza_succubus. There is someone here to see you. Can you please tell me why a strange man is showing up at our house at 3 a.m.? Huh. I go downstairs, and my dad says some guy pulled up in the driveway and asked for me by name. I walk outside with my dad, and this guy who is maybe mid-30s gets out of his car. He says he's the Craigslist guy who wanted to buy my CDs. My dad goes back in the house. I tell the guy it's really, really late to just be stopping by, especially without texting first. However, since I'm awake, I go and grab the CDs. He then proceeds to drone on and on about why he's buying the CDs. He says he's engaged to a woman he loves very much, and all he wants to do is make her happy. He said that last week, someone broke into her car and stole all of her CDs. She was really upset, and he wanted to make it up to her. He looked on Craigslist and found my listing, and was really excited because I had a bunch of the CDs she used to have. Weird thing is, I didn't list any of the artists/bands because I was lazy, but I didn't think about that at the time. Anyway, he said he was getting it for her as a Christmas surprise. He said he was staying with his future in-laws somewhere nearby, and that their family barbecue ran really late, which is why he never made it at 8 p.m. By this point, I've lost interest and say something along the lines of, "That's sweet. Next time, you should probably call or text the Craigslister instead of just showing up." I hand him the CDs, he hands me cash, and I go back inside. 3 days later, I start getting texts from an unknown number. "Hey, I don't know my way around this town. Care to tour guide Winky Face? I could really use a massage. Where can I get a massage in this town? You're Asian. Do you do massage? Would you take $40 for a 1-hour massage? Happy ending? Me finally. Who the F is this? Him, oh sorry. I bought the CDs from you the other day. Do you squirt? I didn't respond obviously. I show my friends that night, and we laugh it off. Then the next day, I get more texts. I still have your address. I'm at the Bank of America near your neighborhood. I just got the $40, babe, laughing face. Only 3 minutes away. Are you home? You stop ignoring me. I'm almost there. I immediately ran downstairs to tell my dad and mom. It was night time, so we shut off all of the lights outside and inside my house. My mom, little brother, and I went in my parents' room in the back of the house. My dad hid behind the curtains of the front bay window with a shovel in his hand. A few minutes later, I heard him run down the front hallway, fling the front door open, and run outside. We heard some faint shouting, so we all walked out of the bedroom. By that time, my dad came back in with his shovel, his face red and his hair all disheveled. Apparently, the guy came driving down our street really slowly. My dad recognized the car and went running outside with the shovel, yelling obscenities at the guy. The guy peeled off and never came back or texted me again. 6 years ago, my now husband, Josh, and I moved to northern Kentucky for work. Northern Kentucky is part of a tri-state area with Ohio and Indiana. This was our first apartment that was larger than a shoebox, and we were looking for some extra counter space. We found the perfect microwave cart on Craigslist, so Josh called up to the seller, who seemed perfectly normal. The address was on Wren Road in Ross, which we assumed was in Kentucky. We also assumed, based on our own experiences with waterfront property on the East Coast, that it would be a nice neighborhood, as it was right on the Ohio River. So we mapped out our route and went on our way in our Mustang convertible, with the top down. It was just getting dark outside at this point. After a considerable drive, and after passing the road by accident, we found it. In addition to the street sign, which was mostly hidden by bushes and trees, it was marked with some very faded wooden signs which we couldn't read very well in the dark. Those signs probably should have been our first inclination that something wasn't right, but we vaguely took notice and turned down the street. Upon going over a small hill that included railroad tracks going perpendicular to the road, we bottomed out and lost our muffler. So with our car's now extra loud engine, we came out of the trees into a small trailer park. There were about 5 trailers on each side of the road, which ended in a cul-de-sac. Immediately we were a bit nervous, having not expected a scene like this. Josh pulled the car in and turned it around, so we were facing the exit. Immediately, the inhabitants of the trailer park, who had all been standing together talking, came over and surrounded our car. I was pretty much panicking at this point and was nudging Josh, just wanting to get out of there. The large, beer-bellied, redneck man, who seemed to be the spokesperson of the group, asked angrily what we were doing there. Josh told him we were there about the microwave cart from Craigslist. The man said, "Craigslist? Nah, we don't got nothing like that here. What did you say you were looking for?" At this point, Josh is calling the woman he had spoken to on the phone, and there are about 8 people all around our car. Luckily for us, they were not at the front of the car. The woman answers the phone. Josh realizes we're obviously in the wrong place, apologizes a few times, and we floor it out of there. On the way out, we go over the hill and bottom out again. Speaking to the woman on the phone, we realized that she was on Wren Road in Ross Township, Ohio. We set off for her actual residence and claimed our microwave cart at her nice, normal suburban home. We were scared shitless, and our car was even louder than normal, but we were safe. There are plenty of lessons to be learned from others who've dealt with Craigslist creeps, but we still use it when necessary, and haven't really had any actual issues. One lesson we did learn though: riverfront property in the Midwest is the complete opposite of beachfront property on the East Coast. So though we don't live anywhere near the Midwest now, creepy trailer park rednecks, let's not meet. So recently in my search for a room to rent, we met on Craigslist. I know, but my credit isn't so great. I had an unsettling experience that I feel compelled to share. This person contacted me about a listing and said they wanted to conduct an in-person interview before giving me the actual address of the rental. Fair enough, I get it. Craigslist can be sketchy, and meeting someone face-to-face before inviting them into your space seems like a reasonable precaution. I agreed, thinking it was a good first step in securing a place to live. The person sent me an address and said it was for a Panera Bread, suggesting we meet there the next day. Again, this sounded perfectly normal, neutral ground in a public place. I agreed, and even made an effort to arrive 10 minutes early, trying to make a good impression. When I got there, I placed an order and then sent them a quick text to let them know I had arrived. In hindsight, I should have asked more about them beforehand, like their name or gender, but I didn't. I was just eager to get the ball rolling on finding a place. As soon as I texted them, they responded. I just pulled up in the back. Okay, not super weird. Maybe they parked behind the building? I texted back. I've already ordered and am seated inside. Their response? Okay, I'll be right here. And that's when the red flags started waving. Big ones. Bright ones. No way was I about to go behind some building to meet a stranger in their car. I mean, seriously, who does that? If we're meeting in person at a Panera Bread, isn't the whole point to meet inside where it's public and safe? I texted them, "Can you come inside, please?" thinking maybe they didn't realize how creepy this sounded. They replied, "I can wait, I'm parked in the shade." Oh, no, absolutely not. At this point, every instinct I had was screaming, "Get out of here." I don't know about you, but I'm not about to risk my safety for a potential rental situation, especially when it's already starting to feel shady. I decided then and there to grab my food, ghost this person, and be done with it. But before leaving, I gave them one last chance to act normal. I texted, "I'm not going behind a building to meet you when you can just come inside." I thought that was the whole point of meeting in person, so everyone feels comfortable. It seemed like a reasonable thing to say, and honestly, I wanted to see how they'd respond. They wrote back, "Okay, I'm coming now, where are you ordering from?" And that's when it all clicked for me. If they had really just pulled up and were parked in the back like they claimed, why would they be asking me where I was ordering from? Shouldn't they already know we're at Panera Bread? That was the final straw. I grabbed my to-go bag, headed for the door, and deliberately walked the opposite way from where they would have come around if they'd actually been parked behind the building. As I left, I sent one last text. "Funny how you gave me an address and then ask where I am, and then I blocked their number." Was I being overly cautious? Maybe. But something about the entire situation just felt off, and I wasn't about to ignore my gut instinct. Better safe than sorry. Looking back, I'm so grateful for my intuition and the life experiences that have taught me to trust it. Sure, maybe nothing would have happened, but there was no reason for them to act the way they did if their intentions were legitimate. What kind of person insists on meeting behind a building when they could just walk inside? Why ask where I ordered from when they supposedly just pulled up? None of it added up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I'd gone out to meet them in their car, something bad might have happened. This experience was a stark reminder of how careful you need to be when dealing with strangers, especially on platforms like Craigslist. Meeting in a public place during the day is a good start, but even then, you need to stay alert and pay attention to red flags. If something feels off, trust yourself and don't stick around to find out if you're right. There are plenty of legitimate rental opportunities out there, and it's just not worth risking your safety for one that gives you a bad vibe. In the end, I walked away with my food, my safety intact, and a renewed appreciation for listening to my gut. If you're in a similar situation, I can't stress enough how important it is to prioritize your well-being over everything else. A room to rent isn't worth putting yourself in danger. This was back in my single mom, online dating days. Good OL, 2016. I came across a decent-looking man on POF who lived in my hometown. I did all the right things, Googled him, checked his social media, chatted for weeks before meeting, met in public. The guy, I'll call him Mike, seemed very nice, even bought a small toy for my toddler son. There just wasn't a romantic connection. We both agreed being friends was a better idea, and carried on chatting through text. I continued my pursuit of a relationship and my friendship with Mike for probably a few weeks when a family friend called my mother frantic about a post she had seen on Craigslist about me. What I had found seemed innocent enough, a stranger professing their desire to help me. I was a single mom working in a fast food drive-thru. It was no secret I was struggling financially. I found it more funny than anything, but was also curious. My Craigslist admirer turned out to be a friend of my mother who had a crush on me for some years. I was only 22 at this time, and yet this isn't the creepy guy of the story. The older man admitted he made his post while drunk after seeing a listing by me offering sexual favors for money. Pictures of my face photoshopped onto nude bodies, my real name, my place of work, the fact I was a single mom living alone, all listed in an ad offering sexual favors for money. I was mortified. Luckily, the post wasn't up for long after the older man reached out to it and took screenshots. Also luckily, The poster was stupid enough to use their real phone number, and a selfie I had only sent one person. Mike was catfishing men as me. I chewed him out and cut him off. Looking back now, I wish I had done more, and thank the heavens I wasn't targeted or assaulted as a result of this disgusting creep. A guy I met on POF used my photos and info to solicit money and dirty photos from men on Craigslist. So I, 23 male, am a broke college student, and I thought I could start a handyman business and make some money while I'm in college. I posted an ad on Craigslist advertising my skills, construction-related skills. Anyhow, a guy wanted me to fix his cash register and stereo. I drive over there and fix the cash register. Turned out to be a loose spring. And while I'm there, he wants me to help him rewind his VHS tape. Quote, I can't see the rewind button. I push the RRW, and it is guy-on-guy vintage gay porn, but in reverse. Anyhow, I figured it was just an accident, and I chatted for a few minutes, and said I would take the stereo home and see if I could fix it. But I got paid for the cash register and left. When I got home, I checked my email and found this. Hope you weren't insulted by the VHS film I turned on. I had forgot I even had it, as I threw my whole library from our video store away. I really get turned on by large morning wood like that. Anyway, feel free to come over anytime. I think I can make it worth your while. Followed by this. I am really anxious to see you again. Whenever you want to come over, late afternoons, or around this time, are always good. Discreet, and $40 for maybe 20 minutes or so. Followed by, I would really like to go down on you, and I swallow, want no reciprocation. You won't be sorry. I am drug and disease free. And when I didn't respond, interested? At this point I wasn't sure what to respond with, like I've got to return the stereo too. I'm not going to fix it. But I'm so glad I used my Google Voice number, but very sorry that I had told him where I lived when I introduced myself. I decided to park my car far away from my dorm. The dorm is a converted motel. My GF, 23, thought it was funny and said, now you know why I don't like going outside at night. Hi. My bad, I wasn't aware of what you were getting at with your previous question. However, I'm going to stick with the services I posted in the ad. I returned the radio to your garage. I left it in a bag so it wouldn't get damaged by the rain. And I don't wish to do any further business with you. Best of luck to you, Dan. My roommate V was always at her boyfriend's place, so I was living essentially alone in a 2-bedroom apt, and my friend Esme was crashing with me while looking for her own place. She found a place nearby, renting a master bedroom with attached bathroom, female only, for way cheap. We checked out the Google Street View on my laptop, and it looked like a cute little beach house. She rode her bike over to check it out alone. The house was right by the beach, and tons of people are always around, so we thought nothing of it. She said it was 2 beach-type white guys, a young, disheveled stoner guy, and a middle-aged parrot head guy that would close talk while giving her obvious elevator eyes the whole time. She's a pretty, petite, Mexican girl, and was 21 but looked younger, and the older guy kept saying she was just what they were looking for, kinda slowly, in what she described as an uber-creepy voice. The younger guy just stared and followed them around. She thought it was odd they each slept in the tiny guest rooms and were renting out the master bedroom, but decided to take a look at it anyway. She said it was a really nice room with a big, heavy, wooden 4-poster bed in the middle of the room that looked like it belonged in a castle, and the bathroom had a huge shower with multiple shower heads on the walls, like it was built for a bunch of people to shower at once. She didn't like being in this back bedroom with the 2 guys looming over her, so she said it was really stuffy, and she wanted to make sure her unlocked bike in the front yard was okay. She all but ran to the front yard, and once she was outside with bystanders she felt much better. So she's standing in the front yard with the older guy, and he's explaining that she can move in right away, but the bed has to stay exactly where it is. It comes with the room and is bolted to the floor so it can't be moved. They have special sheets for it and everything so she can bring all her stuff, but can never move that bed. Also, she can have friends over, but only if they're also young women or girls, no men. And they can sleep over, but also need to sleep in the bed. The hardwood floor was just too uncomfortable. The couches in the living room are suede so no one can sleep on them. All these reasons why a big pile of girls need to sleep on the bed. So she's sufficiently creeped out by this guy and texts me to come over. I ride my bike over, and as I'm pulling up she's leaving. We start to ride a little away, and he yells out after us. It's mandatory, but we always have a blast. She kinda shudders, and I ask her what's up. She says she'll tell me over drinks, so we ride to the nearest little beach bar. She explains about the room, the bed, the guys, and then tells me part of the deal is a mandatory skiing trip to Lake Tahoe in Northern California each year. She can invite girls on the trip that have been to the house before if the guys think they're cool enough. It's free for her and her girlfriends, but mandatory that she go with the guys as their official woman. There would be other men there, but they all brought their own women. He said it like the women would be assigned to them or something. So our minds start racing, and we convince ourselves that the bedroom and trip are some elaborate webcam/BDSM situation or something. Needless to say, she never moved in there or took them up on their free ski weekend offer. Vi ended up moving in with her boyfriend, and Esme moved in with me for a couple years. She was an awesome roommate. My sis and I were on the subject of the guy in my hometown that went on a short killing spree. And she brought this story up I told when it happened. About 8 years ago I stayed downtown. Back then, if you remember, Craigslist had a personals section. I never really dabbled in that, but being curious I did. So I made an ad, nothing spectacular, and waited. Not much went down, just some scammers and bots, married people, etc. I get this one message from a young woman telling me how I sound interesting and would love to get to know me more. We exchanged pics. She exchanged an older pic, but she looked pretty cute in it. Had a bright smile and big blue eyes. She was nice, I just wasn't feeling her like that. She was 18, and I was 24 at the time. But also, she was 7 months pregnant. We enjoyed conversations for a few days, and we decided to link. She didn't stay far from me. She stayed more on the northeast side, just on the edge of downtown. This day it was a festival going on. I asked if she wanted to go, but she couldn't because her legs were tired and kinda sore. So I agreed to meet her at her place. She stayed in a northern slum. Not ghetto, but slum. The house was big, but also you could tell off bat that it was used as an apartment. Wasn't an appealing house, but there weren't many other appealing ones either. When I told her I'm outside, I see her come on the front porch. She was a small thing, all of about 5 feet 0 inches tall. White with dark hair. Couldn't be no more than 90 to 110 pounds, and that was because of the pregnancy. Her baby bump was very noticeable. She had a small, chocolate Labrador puppy with her. They both were happy to see me. When I got close to her, I was surprised. She didn't have the same bright smile I saw in her pics. Her teeth were gray, and her face looked like someone who was into heavy drugs. Her eyes still had light to them, but overall she looked like a tired human being, and not in the fatigued sense. I gave her a hug, made sure to watch my strength. We went into the place. There wasn't nothing sketchy about it. It stunk, like animals and weed. We went upstairs, and I saw a black couple up there. They shut their door, and it seemed like they were arguing. All the rooms upstairs seemed small, and the ceilings were slanted. Her room was fitted pretty nice. She was a smoker. I smelled the ashtray stench. We decided to watch Pineapple Express. That was my first time seeing that movie. She complained about her legs a lot. I seen some little swelling on them, so I gave her legs a rub. I used her body lotion. She loved it a lot and appreciated it big time. We talked, and it was getting late, and I wanted to head out to downtown and catch the heat of the festivities. She looked like she enjoyed my company a lot, and as we were waving goodbye, for some reason, I just said to myself, man, that chick seems troubled. I thought of burning sage when I got home. Like 2 days later, she hit me up saying her ex-BF got kicked out of his place, and he needed somewhere to stay. So me and her hanging out couldn't happen again, which I didn't care. I just told her I understood and make sure she's safe. I left to Chicago to spend time with family. I came back a week later, and after getting my hair retwisted, I saw a realty sign with her last name on it when I was out for a walk. She had a unique last name. I decided to check on her. I sent her an email. No response. About 5 minutes later, I opened up Facebook, and as I scrolled, I stopped immediately, because I saw the very picture she first sent me. I'm like, why the hell is that pic on here? I click a link saying there was a triple homicide. I sat on the curb and was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I read the details and was shocked. She met a guy on Craigslist for sex. Her ex met up with him too, supposedly. He killed the ex-BF and decapitated him. Left his body at a park I was familiar with. He took her and held her captive in his basement. He tortured her for a week. What made me so pissed was that he went to a sports bar down the street from me and told the bartenders how he has someone locked up in his basement right now. Nobody took it serious to call the police. That probably could have saved her. He strangled her and stuffed her in a suitcase. By then the police figured him out, and he was on the run. When they stopped his car, he decided to take himself out. They found him probably because of the emails from Craigslist. I know they investigated my email. I deleted it immediately once I took all this in. About a month later, I was on Craigslist and I saw in the miscellaneous section about meeting scammers and such. I posted a reply about people being careful and I posted her story. Also, around then I had a guy I went to HS with who got caught robbing people for money on there. When I summarized her story, I get a reply. It was from a lady demanding to know what I know. Come to find out it was her aunt. When I told her she wanted to talk on the phone, so I did. I gave her my condolences and told her about the time we spent together. She told me her ex was pimping her out. Her life never was like that. Her parents were good people and confused that she took that path in life. That girl was just a baby. I've been around death before, but nothing like that. Because what if I kept hanging with her? The crazier parts are, the guy had another woman in his place, but she escaped. She was living with him, and he made her a sex slave. But also, he was supposed to fly to Vegas to meet a lady from a fetish site. But there were complications on his end. The day he committed the murder, he contacted the lady and told her he wanted to meet her ASAP. He was paying for the travel and everything, but she needed his info. She didn't go through with it, but she looked him up and happened to see his connection with a triple homicide. What's even more dark is that they didn't find her ex-BF's head at the park. Just his body. They found his head north of the city in 2019, like 25 miles away from his dead body. Why did he take that head? What'd he do with it to travel with it like that? The awkward thing is that there was a lady who lived with me a year later after that. Things were complicated, and I had to kick her out. She moved into the exact room that chick was in. I know because I had to come over there to give her something she left. This is also the girl that played a major part in my sister and her ex-BF breaking up for good. People do come into your life for a reason, I suppose. I used Craigslist for business and some social events. But after that my approach became entirely different. And I became very cautious on who I met. P.S. He killed himself after the end of the high-speed chase. The cops followed him and he shot himself. The woman was in the trunk of his car inside a suitcase. I really love Craigslist. I'd estimate I've met maybe 300 people for buying/selling stuff, and for the most part, everyone was nice and harmless. However, I did run into 2 creeps who made me rethink meeting strangers alone to sell stuff. FYI, I was an early 20s female at the time. First guy, it's 2009, and I'm staying with my parents for the Christmas holidays in a small town in Florida. I'm going through my childhood room and cleaning out the closet and find a giant CD holder full of maybe 100 really shitty CDs. Think Nickelback, Aqua, Chumbawamba. It's the 21st century. No one uses CDs anymore. I figure I'd try to sell the CDs on Craigslist. I put up a listing. 100 CDs from the late 90s and early to mid 2000s, mix of pop and rock. All for $35 OBO. The next day, I get an email from a guy named John around 2 p.m. He says that he's in town temporarily and that he wants the CDs. He says he can pick them up after dinner around 8 p.m. I email him back my address and number and tell him to text or call when he's on his way. 8 p.m. comes and goes. I figure I've been stood up, which happens often on Craigslist. No big deal. My dad works for a liquor distribution company and would often do demonstration nights at restaurants and bars and would come home at bar closing time. This night, he gets home at around 3 a.m. I'm in college and a total night owl, so I'm still up probably eating junk food, surfing the web, and watching horror flicks. I hear a car pull up, look out the window, and see him sitting in his car eating food. He often stops at Taco Bell on his way home and eats it in his car, so my mom doesn't know he's cheating on his diet. Maybe 10 minutes later, my dad comes in and shouts my name. Pizza_succubus. There is someone here to see you. Can you please tell me why a strange man is showing up at our house at 3 a.m.? Huh. I go downstairs, and my dad says some guy pulled up in the driveway and asked for me by name. I walk outside with my dad, and this guy who is maybe mid-30s gets out of his car. He says he's the Craigslist guy who wanted to buy my CDs. My dad goes back in the house. I tell the guy it's really, really late to just be stopping by, especially without texting first. However, since I'm awake, I go and grab the CDs. He then proceeds to drone on and on about why he's buying the CDs. He says he's engaged to a woman he loves very much, and all he wants to do is make her happy. He said that last week, someone broke into her car and stole all of her CDs. She was really upset, and he wanted to make it up to her. He looked on Craigslist and found my listing, and was really excited because I had a bunch of the CDs she used to have. Weird thing is, I didn't list any of the artists/bands because I was lazy, but I didn't think about that at the time. Anyway, he said he was getting it for her as a Christmas surprise. He said he was staying with his future in-laws somewhere nearby, and that their family barbecue ran really late, which is why he never made it at 8 p.m. By this point, I've lost interest and say something along the lines of, "That's sweet. Next time, you should probably call or text the Craigslist instead of just showing up." I hand him the CDs, he hands me cash, and I go back inside. 3 days later, I start getting texts from an unknown number. "Hey, I don't know my way around this town. Care to tour guide Winky Face? I could really use a massage. Where can I get a massage in this town? You're Asian. Do you do massage? Would you take $40 for a 1-hour massage? Happy ending?" Me finally, "Who the fuck is this?" Him, "Oh sorry. I bought the CDs from you the other day. Do you squirt?" I didn't respond obviously. I show my friends that night, and we laugh it off. Then the next day, I get more texts. "I still have your address. I'm at the Bank of America near your neighborhood. I just got the $40, babe," laughing face. "Only 3 minutes away. Are you home? You fucking cunt. Stop ignoring me. I'm almost there." I immediately ran downstairs to tell my dad and mom. It was night time, so we shut off all of the lights outside and inside my house. My mom, little brother, and I went in my parents' room in the back of the house. My dad hid behind the curtains of the front bay window with a shovel in his hand. A few minutes later, I heard him run down the front hallway, fling the front door open, and run outside. We heard some faint shouting, so we all walked out of the bedroom. By that time, my dad came back in with his shovel, his face red and his hair all disheveled. Apparently, the guy came driving down our street really slowly. My dad recognized the car and went running outside with the shovel, yelling obscenities at the guy. The guy peeled off and never came back or texted me again. Second guy, I was moving from Florida to DC and was going to load up my car as much as I could with stuff. However, I lived on the 3rd floor plus a bit of a walk from my assigned parking spot, so I figured I could use some help. I posted an ad on Craigslist gigs. I said I was looking for someone to help me load some heavy items like TV, desk, etc. in my car. Less than an hour's worth of work, and I'd pay $45 or whatever. I give the very first responder my number and address, and he shows up. He was probably 5 feet 8 inches and 350 pounds of pure fat. The sweat and smell coming off of this guy in the Florida heat was pretty nauseating, but I didn't care as long as he did the job right. While he was carting heavy stuff, I was loading lighter things. Whenever I'd go upstairs to grab another load, he'd hurry after me so he could walk up the stairs behind me. I had the door propped open, so he didn't have to worry about me needing to unlock the door for him or anything. When he'd follow me up the stairs, he made these weird grunting noises like mmhmm, but I assumed it was because he was out of shape. Eventually, everything's loaded properly, save for some sweat smears on my stuff. I pay him, and he drives off. I go back in my place to finish loading and cleaning. I go out maybe 45 minutes later to put another load in my car, and I see his truck is back, parked across the street from mine. He's sitting in the driver's seat, looking at me. When he sees me notice him, he looks away. I walk over to his window and knock. He rolls it down, and I ask if he needs any help or if he was lost. I was really confused as to why he had come back, and I knew he didn't live near me. He didn't say anything, just rolled his window back up and drove off. I'm okay, whatever. Of course, 5 minutes later, my phone starts blowing up. I don't recognize the number, so I don't answer the calls. Then texts start rolling in. Him, I bet you taste salty and sweet. Me, who is this? Him, your bits. Him, what you up to tonight? I can come back over. I get this sinking feeling it's the Craigslist guy. He had never called me about the job when I gave him my number, so I didn't know what his number was. Him, I like your pink panties. Then I realize he was looking up my dress when I was walking up the stairs. I immediately feel like a total idiot for wearing a dress that day. He then started dialing my number over and over again. I didn't know how to do the block number thing through Sprint, so I had to just turn my phone off. Later, I was with my guy friend grabbing a bite and turned my phone back on. I got another text from the guy about how he wanted to toss me around like a rag doll and tie me up and make me beg for it. I show the text to my friend and tell him the story. The Craigslist creep then proceeds to start blowing up my phone again. So my friend answers and says he is going to cut his dick off and feed it to his dog if he ever contacts me again. I moved the next day, so I never had to worry about him randomly showing up in his truck again. Since then, I've bought and sold stuff on Craigslist, but I always make people meet me at a public place. I also stalk people's email addresses, Google Plus accounts, etc. So the setting is 2015. My sister and I are home alone watching Craigslist horror stories on YouTube. A bit ironic, I know. Now for reference, I was 13 while my sister was 17, and having these watch parties had become something of a habit as it was our last year together before she went off to college. We lived in a safe neighborhood, and nothing had ever really happened at that point that would give us any reason to be anxious about being alone. Anyways, time goes on, and my sister suggests we order a pizza since she's starving. I'm not one to turn down a pizza, so I naturally agree, and we place an order at a local pizza place. We continue watching our videos for another 15 to 20 minutes before I step out to use the restroom. Just then, I hear the doorbell ring followed by my sister getting up to go answer it, so I carry on with my business with the assumption it was just the pizza. I'd say only 2 minutes had passed as I come back and realize my sister was still at the door talking with someone. I couldn't really make out what was being said, but I knew it was definitely a man's voice responding to her. As I go to see what's going on, my sister promptly shuts the door, pizza in hand. I initially assumed maybe there was just an issue with the payment, so I just tease my sister for taking so long and go sit down. I know. Who thought a 13-year-old boy could be an oblivious asshole? It didn't take long for me to realize, though, that my sister wasn't eating, despite this whole thing being her idea, and even more so, she had a very nervous look on her face now, and wasn't speaking much. I asked her what was up, and she proceeds to tell me that when she opened the door to greet the pizza guy, he looked at her as if he was checking her out, and followed up by giving her the most unsettling smile she's ever seen. She was just trying to get the pizza and go as we had already paid online, but the creep insisted on trying to make conversation with her. The man pretended to fumble around trying to get the pizza box out of his bag, all while asking very personal questions that he certainly had no business asking, like how old she was, and if she was alone. Now, I admittedly thought she was just messing with me. I mean, stuff like that can never actually happen to people, right? But nevertheless, it still left me feeling a bit anxious. We tried to enjoy the food and move on, and I'd say about an hour or two later, we had finally calmed down about the whole thing. Right as we were getting ready to clean up and go back to our own rooms, there's a knock at the door, a very loud and aggressive one at that. We share the same nervous look, then hesitantly slip over to a window to see if we can get a look at whoever's knocking. Now, I hadn't seen the guy, but my sister immediately recognized him as the pizza guy from before. We were contemplating calling the police, but the guy only knocked once or twice more before getting in his car and taking off way too fast down the road, almost like he knew if he continued, he was more than likely going to end up in a lot of trouble. We made a round around the house, making sure everything was locked up, and then waited for what felt like ages for our parents to finally get home. My sister told them about what happened, but our mom insisted we were just being dramatic, that we had just made ourselves nervous because of the videos we're always watching. While we both initially insisted on being serious, we eventually just gave up and tried to move on from the whole thing. We ordered from that place a few more times, but thankfully never saw that same delivery man again. Nothing else ever came of the situation, but I can't help but think about what could have happened if that creep had been just a bit more persistent. What if he had kept trying to get into the house? Or if we had accidentally left the door unlocked? I think his intentions were obvious, and I can only hope that his behavior has caught up with him, and that he's somewhere getting the help that he most definitely needs. Again, like my other posts, I'm no writer/storyteller. Please bear with me. I have a very stable job, and a very good one at that. But sometimes you need extra money, right? I am currently moving into a newer, bigger and nicer apartment, so I've been putting down payments and using money to move. By no means am I broke, but it's nice to earn some extra cash. I thought of selling some clothes that I never wear. I've already donated a lot of older clothes to the Salvation Army, but for the clothes I never wore and that are worth some good cash, I decided to sell over Craigslist and Let Go app. Let Go app has never failed me. Craigslist, well, I've never tried it before, but my friends have had some great experiences. I was trying to sell a very cute, short sleeve, black and white flower dress for $12. I put my number down so I could just talk to people directly, since I don't use my email too often. Side note, I posted a picture of me in the dress that my friend took, not showing face, and with a blank white wall background behind me. I got a text a couple hours after I posted the dress. Here's how the conversation went. Stranger: "Hey, I saw your dress on sale. Is it still available?" Me: "Yes, it is." Stranger: "It's kind of hard to see the dress in the picture you have posted. Do you have any more pictures of you in the dress?" I have sent a picture of the dress on a hanger. One picture close up for detail, one to see the full dress. Stranger: "I asked for pictures with it on. I'll just look at the ad tomorrow." I never responded back. It was very alarming to have someone talk to me like that. Why would someone want to see the dress on? I mean, I guess I understand. But really? 2 days later, I got a weird phone call at 7:05 a.m. By the way, this was my off day, and I usually keep my ringer on because I'm always on call. To see that it wasn't work and an unknown caller, I was pretty pissed, so I let it ring. They call again right after. I sighed and cleared my throat to answer. Me: "Hello." A raspy, gargled man's voice answered back to me. Stranger: "Yes, hello. Are you the one selling the dress?" Me: "I am, yes." Stranger: "I'm calling for my wife. I have some questions." In my head I'm like, but I go with it. Stranger: "My name is Mark, and yours?" I give him my name, but he fails many times and almost made me think, due to my being prank called. It was pretty frustrating because I told him, and spelt my name about 20 times. We get over introductions, and he gets into the questioning. Mark: "Is this a thick dress?" Me: "It is." Mark: "Can this be worn as a fancy dinner dress?" Me: "It can be. You can dress it casual or dressed up." Mark: "Okay. How tall are you?" Me: "I'm 5 feet 3 inches. Mark: "Okay, so my wife's pretty short and around your height. Do you wear a bra with the dress?" Me: "She can wear it with or without." Mark continues to push if I've ever worn a bra with the dress. I get short with my answers. Mark: "Where are you right now? I feel like I've woken you up." Me: I decided to lie to cover myself. "Yes, I'm at a friend's currently." Mark: "A girlfriend's?" Me: "A friend's. I'm just not home, okay?" Mark: "But did you sleep in the same bed as her?" Me: "Can we move on? I'm not home right now." His phone cut out. He calls back a minute later. Mark: "Sorry, my phone died. So anyways, what size cup are you?" Me: "Excuse me? I don't feel comfortable answering this." Mark: "B or C?" Me: "I'm not answering this." Mark: "You look big-breasted, very gifted." My wife hasn't asked, do you? Me: "I don't want to answer this. You're making me feel uncomfortable. I'm going to hang you." Mark: "But does the dress ride up your back? When you walk, does it show your ass?" I hung up. He decided to call me over and over, and it's not like I can block his number because his number was unknown. By the 20th call, I answered to tell him off. Me: "Listen, I don't feel like sell." Mark: I know where you live. I want that dress." I hung up and cried. I didn't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I would understand if a guy wants a dress for his own pleasure, sexual or not. But at least tell me and not act like his wife needs one. Or does he have a wife? Why couldn't she call me herself? I don't know. I have so many questions. I'm legit scared, and this number won't stop calling me. I even got an email that's not related to this about a guy named Mr. Anonymous asking for smelly old flats. Is this normal for Craigslist? I had just turned 15, and my parents had recently stopped spoiling me, which meant no free cash. I decided to do what they wanted and take some initiative by looking for a job. I found an ad on Craigslist for a job, which was taking care of some guy named Mark's house while he worked for the summer. The man looked and seemed normal enough, and the summer job paid really well, and so I decided to go and see how it goes. My mom dropped me off at his house and met with him. They talked and learnt more about each other since my mom wanted to get to know him, and then she left. For the first day, he stayed with me and showed me what I would have to do, which was mostly dusting, sweeping, vacuuming, and taking care of the regular house chores. He left the next day, and everything went pretty well. I finished quickly, watched T.V., ate some of the snacks he would put out for me. He would always come home at 7:30, and by then I would need to get the stuff ready for his dinner. After he would come home, pay me and give me some food to go. I did this for about a month, and was really racking up. I planned on doing this again next summer, but there was this one day when he had left. It was one of my last few days, and I wanted to make it last. I finished up quickly, then took a bunch of his snacks, I don't know why I just did, and went snooping through his drawers. I really shouldn't have, but I'm glad I did. I found a few harmless items like video cameras, images of normal things, sunsets, rivers. And then things got weirder. There were images of children my age, working, sweeping, cooking, using the bathroom. And then it got worse. Pictures of me in the bathroom, of me taking a nap. I searched through more of his drawers and found CDs, all labeled with different names, along with flash drives, also labeled .5 of them had my name on it. He had been videotaping me. I walked around all over his house and searched every wall, bathroom, the basement, all the bedrooms. I found 11 cameras, but by then I had stopped looking. I checked the last bathroom, and this is where things got pretty real, if they weren't real enough. The camera was on. It was the type of ones used for security, with the red flashing light used for when it was on. I stared up at it, then stuck up my middle finger and left. I went back to his room and gathered every photograph, every CD, every flash drive, and anything I could find to arrest him, and I left the house. I didn't have any way to get home, so I walked to the nearest shop and called my mom, and then the police, the guy was charged and arrested for multiple felonies, but that was all I was told. I'm guessing one of them was possession of child pornography, but I don't want to know what the other ones are. This happened to me while I was living in a university town. I had only a semester left while my friends had 2 semesters left in school. So I rented a room and house with 2 guys I found on Craigslist. I know that sounds creepy, but that's not the creepy part. I went for a run one morning, came back to my house, and hopped in the shower. With shampoo in my hair, I heard banging noises coming from the front door. I figured that my 2 roommates, who were friends with each other, had friends coming over and didn't think anything of it at first. I continued my shower, but the banging didn't stop. It continued to get louder. I started to hurry things along and started to become concerned. By the end of my shower, I heard a big crashing sound. Quickly toweling myself off to go investigate, the door to my bathroom opened. In the doorway was a man I had never seen before. He was looking my naked body up and down while I desperately covered myself up. I asked the only question that came to mind, "Who are you?" He didn't answer. He continued to look at me like I was a piece of meat. I asked the next most logical question, "Are you here by yourself?" Another man silently peeked his head from around the corner of the hallway. The first man told me to get on the ground. I said no, and he hit me open-palmed in the face. He then said, "Bitch, do you want to die?" I had never been hit before. During the recoil, after his hand connected with my face, time had slowed down. During that split second, I experienced the most intense fear in not knowing what to do next. Not knowing what to do to safely get myself out of this situation. Where were my roommates? I was in this alone. I must act alone. My cell phone was in my bedroom. My only plan was to get out of the bathroom to get my phone. I tried leaving the bathroom, and this is where my memory fades and has only been filled in with what others told me. My roommates were home. They came out of their rooms when they heard me screaming, "No, no, no." The first man had his arms around my waist from behind. When the man saw my roommates, he let go of me. The man demanded that my roommates give back his money. My roommates told the man, "We don't have your money." The 2 men left out the front door. This is where my memory begins again. I fell to the ground sobbing uncontrollably. My memory of this is actually from above, looking down at myself like a bird's eye view. My face into floor, curled up like a bug. Once I regained control of my body, I went into my room and called my mom. I could barely get the story out to her by the time the police came. I had to throw on some clothes and talk to them outside. The banging and crashing noises were the 2 men kicking the original 1920s door in half to gain entry. It only took them a few minutes. I told the police what I remembered, which was minimal. They took DNA from face and fingerprints from my bathroom door. The police said they would do their best, but it was the 50th home invasion that day. It wasn't even noon. Now 10 years later, this is still difficult for me to talk about. Memories of this day have come back to me like a bolt of lightning throughout the years. Some are still buried. For example, it took me 7 years to remember I went running that day, the reason I was in the shower to begin with. Hi all, been a lurker for a while. I love this subreddit, and I've got an experience to post that my boyfriend and I went through just a few days ago. This is long, but here goes. I'm still scared. We recently moved to Salem, Massachusetts a couple of weeks ago, and had a place set up with roommates, but it fell through at the last minute, and we were left stranded with nowhere to go for the night. We walked to a nearby town to try and find a place to sleep for the night until we were able to figure things out. Boyfriend is working, and I'm still looking for a job and have several interviews next week. Anyways, to the story. So after having nowhere to go and being desperate, it's also around 3 a.m. So my boyfriend posts a Craigslist ad reaching out for help. I know Craigslist is risky, and this story is why. Someone responded to the ad and offered us a place, and we found our way to the address. When we got there, an old, disheveled, and very dirty-looking man was at this garage on a big hill littered with old camper trailers and abandoned vehicles. It looked like a literal junkyard. We introduce ourselves, and he tells us he's got a place in this shack in an attic. My boyfriend was sketched out, and so was I, but we were so exhausted from walking all night that we really needed sleep, so we took it. The attic was filthy and cold, 40 degrees or less, and there was a dirty mattress and some blankets. He said he took in a junkie couple, but they left without notice months ago. Really sketchy, but I needed to sleep. He let us sleep for the day, and when we woke up, we decided to go to a nearby McDonald's to charge our phones and see if any friends answered if we could stay with them temporarily. The guy, Richard, starts texting my phone and leaving me voicemails saying how we don't trust him and why did we leave. So I sent a text back saying we were charging our phones and we'd be back to talk to him. After that, he sent me a text saying in all caps, "I guess you don't trust me, bye." I'm like, WTF? So I call him and explain the situation, and he starts saying how we need to come back so he can talk to us about the place. We come back and he's very visibly drunk. He starts rambling on about how he's not a child molester and how we're stupid for going to McDonald's to charge our phones, and we're stupid for buying food at McDonald's because he has food for us. I wanted to leave then, but I don't know anyone here. My boyfriend does, but his friends all live with their parents, and everyone said no to us staying with them. So boyfriend goes to the store to get smokes, and I stayed behind to help creepy Richard with some stuff in the yard. He starts almost interrogating me, asking would I die for boyfriend? Do I trust him? How much do I love him? I tell him yes, I trust him, and I love him. He tells me I'm stupid, and that he's just gonna leave me, and it won't work out. We've been together 3 years, and are very close. He would never leave me because we're very loyal to each other. Richard then stands up and starts kind of darting around back and forth around me, like he's staring at me and around me, kind of like he's trying to read me. I asked him what he was doing because it made me uncomfortable, and he shook his head as if coming out of a trance and apologized. Then he said I was stupid for trusting my boyfriend, and he then says again how he's not a child molester. No one even said anything remotely relevant to this, so it was suspicious that he kept trying to stress to us he wasn't a molester. Then he tells me that he's a mean person and has been accused of killing and raping people, but that he's not a rapist, but he's killed someone. I start panicking and boyfriend returns. We are alone in the attic, and I tell him what happened with Richard, and he's panicked, and we're not sure what to do because no one can take us in, and we didn't have enough money for a motel until a few days later when he got paid. So we try to stick it out a bit and decide if Richard tries something we can protect ourselves. Next day, boyfriend goes to work, and I'm there alone and scared. I have my phone, and am able to talk to boyfriend while he's at work. Richard keeps finding excuses to come up to the attic and talk to me. He asks me if I want to take a shower at some random guy's house I don't know. I said no, and made up an excuse about not wanting to get sick with wet hair. He asks again and again, trying to convince me, and I said no, I'm not leaving without boyfriend. He finally leaves me alone about it, but still keeps finding excuses to come talk to me. Boyfriend finally comes back after work, and I'm really panicked and crying and begging to leave. We figure something out and are able to get to his mom's. That night, Richard comes back up to the attic saying he's got to talk to boyfriend, and I go with him into his camper trailer with boyfriend. There's a computer monitor hooked up to a TV with a naked woman. There's stacks of adult pornography DVDs all over. The place reeks of a horrid smell we can't describe. I wanted to leave right then. Finally, we attempt to sleep one more night there, and around 4 a.m. in the shack below us, we hear lots of banging and hammering and all kinds of loud noises. We're both panicked and stay quiet since he's right below us. We hear him talking to himself in full conversation, as if someone was around. No, he wasn't on his phone. After about an hour, he comes up there and starts asking boyfriend to help him with some heavy loading of junk into a truck. Boyfriend says no and explains we're leaving, and we have to be somewhere to catch the train at a specific time that morning. Richard gets visibly irritated and tries to keep us there again. Finally, we're able to leave. Boyfriend's mom gets us, and I start crying and begging to please not take us back there. She's confused because she doesn't know what's happened because boyfriend was scared to tell her. Finally, we tell her the whole story, and she's concerned and empathetic with us. She says she's going to make sure we don't go back. This is now 1 day later I'm writing this, and we found a friend who's letting us crash for a few weeks until we save up some paychecks. I was looking on Craigslist to see about apartment rentals, and I see Richard's ads about needing a female roommate and wants pictures and such. I knew it was him because he said he was moving to Maine soon, and he told us a lot about his plan to move to Maine. There's currently about 8 ads on Craigslist, all from him looking for a female roommate in Salem, and he's 53 years old, named Richard, and moving to Maine. This scared me even more because I don't know if he's trying to lure in females or not. If boyfriend never showed up from work, I know I'd probably be dead now. I got horrible vibes from the man, and honestly thought we'd die there. I have his phone number, and wanted to see if I could find his full name to do an internet arrest search. I was unable to get results without paying, and I can't afford that. I'm debating placing an anonymous call to the cops about his address, and what he's saying about he killed someone, and everyone says he's a molester. I never want to see that place again. I'll give a little background about myself for my story. I'm a young gay male living in a medium-sized city. The dating scene is rather limited, and most gay people use apps or websites for meeting others for encounters or dates. I frequent websites and apps daily just to see if there's anyone new out there that I haven't already spoken to, yet I rarely actually meet anyone from online. The fear of STIs or being robbed has always been in the back of my mind, so I generally just browse without ever actually meeting guys. About 6 months ago, while browsing Craigslist, I found an ad that seemed to be somewhat what I was looking for. The ad was by a man a little older than myself, who seemed to want the same things I wanted. He wanted to meet up with a guy my age and get to know one another over drinks, maybe a little cuddle session, whatever else may follow, and not just a quickie kind of thing. After responding to this ad, the guy and I talked for about a month through texting without ever making plans of meeting. I finally got the confidence and asked if he wanted to meet. He agreed, and we decided that I'd drive to his place, which was about 10 miles from me and out of the city limits. The day we decided to meet, it was getting late, about 6 p.m. The sun was still somewhat out, but it was getting darker. I got in my car and drove out to the area where he lived. The guy texted me and said that he'd be walking on the side of the road because he was coming back from visiting with a friend, and just asked that I pick him up to go back to his place. He told me before that he had 2 kids that lived with him, but that the kid's mother wasn't in the picture. He said that his kids were at a friend's house and would be back later, so we'd have the place to ourselves. While making my way to the guy's house, I saw him walking on the side of the road. He was holding a large speaker and covered in a hoodie, which seemed strange because it wasn't cold at all where we live. The road we were on was very much outside the city lines, on a dirt road with random trailers set up every acre or so. I stopped the car and said something friendly like, "Hey stranger, need a ride?" He didn't smile. He just opened the door and got into my car without saying a word. I thought that this was strange because we literally spent a month having friendly chats, and I just figured that he'd act happy to see me, or at least not awkward about it. After picking him up and making my way to his house, he then tells me to turn around and go back to the main road. He wanted to get a blunt and some alcohol so that we could chill together. So not thinking anything strange at this point, I agree and head back the other way. While on this long dirt road with no street lights, he mentions that his power is out at his house and asks if that's okay with me. I was slightly thrown off by this, but I said I'm sure, as long as you have candles or some light source. He didn't say anything, just kept looking straight ahead like I never said anything. I then thought, what about your kids? How are children living in the house with no power? So I asked him. This is where things started to get very strange. He replied, oh, they're staying with my mom for a while. But he just told me a few days ago that his kids lived with him with no mother. Questions ran through my mind, but I didn't feel like I was in trouble yet. We arrived at the store, and he got out with his face and head covered like he was hiding from somebody. This seemed strange. Then he got back in the car after making his purchase. While traveling back to his place, which was about a 15-minute drive, he then told me I had to sling crack to get money for this so we could hang out tonight. I was very surprised and shocked when he randomly told me this. The situation was getting sketchy, so I asked if he had condoms, just in case we did decide to need them. He said no, so I dropped him off at another store nearby before starting our journey down the long dirt road. After inconsistent and strange behaviors coming from the guy, I was just really wanting to get out of the situation as fast as I could at this point. I dropped him off at a local grocery store to pick up condoms, thinking this could be my out. I could just drive away and block his number and be done with the situation. After he walked into the store, I was trying to figure out what to do at this point. I wanted to just drive away, but I didn't want to just leave somebody stranded. I finally got the nerve to leave, but his huge speaker was sitting in my floorboard. I wanted nothing connecting me with this person, and feared that he might possibly say I stole the speaker. So I got out of my car, ran to the passenger side, opened the door, started dragging the speaker from my car, and heard, "What are you doing?" It was him. He was right behind me. Fear ran through my body like I had been caught stealing something or lying about a bad grade to my parents. I told him, I was just going to move this to the back seat so you'd have more room in the car. Quick save, and he seemed to have bought my horrible explanation. But now he's here in my car, and my only out is gone. We're driving down the old, dark, dirt road, and all that's going through my mind is, how do I get out of this alive? I'm trying to catch him in another lie to see if this is actually happening, or just my imagination. But I can't seem to get any information out of him. He just sits beside me, looking straight ahead, fidgeting with something in his pockets, as though he has a mission to complete, and I'm just there to bring him to it. After driving about 15 minutes down the dirt road, I notice that there are no longer trailers. The road is pitch black, only lit up by my headlights. I then ask him if his place is coming up, because the navigation said it should be right here. He tells me, the address that I gave you is an old business. My address doesn't show up on Google Maps for some reason. Red alert. I started panicking, just knowing that I was about to be robbed or killed in a few moments. I slowed the car down and just thought of anything that could get me out at this point. I told him that my best friend was waiting for me to get back to have drinks with her. I said that I didn't realize we'd be driving so much and that it'd take this long. I'm not sure if he bought this excuse or not, but I told him that I texted my friend the address he gave me so she'd know how long I would be out and when to expect me back for our planned night out. He seemed to trust my explanation, but was very irritated. He said to me, can't we just have a little car fun real quick right here? Nobody lives out here, so nobody will even see us. I said, no, I'm sorry, my friend is going to be pissed, and she's already called me when you were in the store. I told her that I'd only be about 30 minutes and be back in time for drinks. I was ready to abandon my car at this point if he pulled out a knife or anything other than a gun. But luckily, he just kinda huffed, got out of my car, slammed the door, and started to put his head in the window to tell me something. I quickly hit the gas and turned the wheel, leaving nothing but a smoke cloud behind me. I couldn't see him in the rear view mirror due to the darkness of the night, but I imagine he might have been flipping me off or coughing from the dust plume made by my tires. After pulling myself together and realizing that I might have been the next Oprah story, I called my friend, who wasn't waiting for me, my mom, my sister, everyone that I loved, and told them a slimmed version of the story that took place that night. I teared up a little thinking that I could have almost died, but overcame that pretty quickly. When I got home that night, I decided to pull up the address he gave me. I noticed that about 2 miles down the road, there was one house sitting alone with no neighbors. The road was a dead end. I then used Google Street View and saw that the house was completely abandoned with no doors and dirty walls. I Googled the actual address of that house and found that it was posted for sale about 5 years ago and was still on the market. I'm guessing nobody wants to purchase a possible crack house. My friends told me later that they imagined that he wanted to get me to the house and do whatever he wanted. Since there is no traffic that far down the road, I'm sure it would take quite a while to find a body that went missing. After all of this, I have vowed to never meet anyone from Craigslist ever again, unless it's in a police parking lot. I did vow to just never leave my house, but school and work have made that impossible. All in all, I'm okay with what happened. But it really brought to light what could happen when you least suspect it. My boyfriend and I recently bought a trailer in the middle of nowhere. We are pretty far from civilization, and there's not much work in the city we live. It costs a solid $50 in gas round trip to go into town, so needless to say we like to plan accordingly and get all our errands done in one day. Grocery shopping, laundry, etc. What happens from this point, I most certainly realize has a ton of red flags. However, in the moment all I can do is question my own personal sanity. Like I can't even believe I am experiencing this. I find an ad in the domestic section of Craigslist. A couple claims they are getting ready to move and need help watching their newborn baby. May need to do some light housekeeping while the baby is asleep. Please include a picture of yourself in the responding email. I go back and forth with the lady, and we decide to meet at 12 p.m. the following day. That morning I am texting with her and let her know I'm running about 15 minutes behind. It was towards the end of the month, and I had exceeded my data amount, and could not MapQuest the directions, and we had become lost. I went into an apartment complex's office and asked if they would be so kind to please print the directions for me. I had left my phone in the car, and while inside the lady had called to give me directions, I had texted her to let her know I'm lost. My boyfriend answered the phone, and she became frazzled, saying to please hold, that she was backing out her truck right then. Prior to this conversation, I had told her that I would prefer to arrive when she was home. She then told me that she was home now, but now she isn't and is backing out truck. Didn't make a lot of sense. However, my boyfriend told her I'd be there shortly. I asked him to please walk me to the door. Upon getting to the house, the entire perimeter of their home had about 6 cameras in all directions. There was a huge storage container on the street. The car in the driveway had a hand-typed sign on window that said baby in CAR. Then the car parked in front of the house on street had a young pretty Mexican girl, couldn't have been more than 20 years old, passed out with her mouth open and drooling, windows hardly cracked in the middle of summer. To paint the picture, my boyfriend has some visible tattoos, tall white man, heart of gold, but could appear intimidating. We knocked on the door several times for a few minutes and didn't get an answer. I call the lady and she says, oh, just keep knocking, he's home. He finally answers the door and the hair on the back of my neck raised. He is very creepy looking and speaks in a thick Russian accent, saying, no, never mind, we called someone else. I responded, I just spoke to your wife, I don't understand. And he just repeats himself. My boyfriend gets upset and says, we drove very far to meet you. Do you have gas money for our time? This man doesn't open the door more than 6 inches during this entire conversation. He then closes the door and locks it, goes to get $20 for us, quickly sticks his hand through the door, and we leave. As we are walking out, we both look at the girl again, not moved at all, comment how weird this was, and take off. I call the wife's phone back, which is an out-of-state Google Voice phone number. She never answered nor returned any of my text messages. I called my mother to let her know what happened, and she insists that we call the police for a welfare check. We did just that. Needless to say, I'm a lot more cautious while looking for online gigs, and about a week later, I'm looking on the same Craigslist section. Craigslist typically will show a map to the major cross streets for where the gig is taking place. This particular area is mainly a college town and only has very few suburban homes, mainly retired couples. Sure enough, they posted another ad, same cross streets and request for picture, except a little different gig. This time it was for an in-home dog sitter. I totally feel I dodged a major bullet. Please be careful, everyone. Zoxo. So my fiancé and I have been on the lookout for a kitten to accompany our 3-month-old kitten we have already. We searched and searched until one day he said to me, let's look on Craigslist, so I did. We found the perfect one, but the only problem was it was 2 hours and 30 minutes away from our home. I inquired about it at around 10:30 p.m. I know it was late, but almost immediately I got a response. She sounded very nice over text and asked to see where I lived, so that she would feel settled about the kitten living with us. She also insisted on going to their house. I know. I should have just dropped it. At the time I thought nothing of it. So I sent them a video. We set up a time for the next day to meet. Next day came. I wasn't going to take my fiancé, but he insisted on coming with me because he wanted to be my protection in case, since Craigslist is sketchy. So we drove 2 hours and 30 minutes on our way there. As we were on our way, I was texting this girl that we would get there on time, and she responded, great, see you then. We arrived to the home, me in the driver's seat and my fiancé in the passenger seat with the window down. I texted the girl and I got no response. I called and no response. I ended up calling 5 times and texting in the course of an hour and no response. I went up to the house and knocked on the door. Nothing. There was a car in the driveway, but no response from the number or the door. We got there at 6:30 and waited until almost 8. Nothing. The neighbor came out asking what was wrong. I said I'm here since I inquired about a kitten, and she said, a kitten? I said, yes, it was an ad on Craigslist. She said, no one has kittens in this home though. I showed her the ad and she said, oh, I know them. They are very sketchy people, and they don't own any cats. I just helped them move their furniture yesterday. So I said, well, on their ad it says that they have to get rid of their kittens since their new place doesn't allow pets. So neighbor said, that's impossible, I have a dog and so does the next door over. I immediately found this creepy and assumed the neighbor was also in on something since it was too creepy and I was feeling anxious. I thanked her and left along with my fiancé. Literally immediately when we pulled out of the street, I got a text from the girl saying, I'm just now getting your messages. Something must be wrong with me phone. Did you still want the kitten or no? I didn't answer, and we headed back home. What I don't understand is they didn't get any money from me, but they asked me to show up not knowing I'd be with my fiancée. I had a bad feeling about it. What did they want from me?